Hello, I am Mike.
Hello, I am Lily. Welcome to English Podcast Flow.
Today's episode is all about speaking without pausing. Do you often, you know, uh, stop in the middle of a sentence trying to find the right word? We've all been there, haven't we? It's like your brain suddenly decides to take a vacation right when you need it the most.
Oh, yeah.
Well, don't worry, because in this podcast, we'll be exploring some really cool techniques that'll help you speak English more smoothly and naturally. Get ready to unlock your inner chatterbox. So let's kick things off by understanding, like why we pause when we speak English. It happens to all of us, but what's really going on in our minds when those pesky pauses pop up?
It's a great question. And, studies show that there are actually quite a few reasons why people pause while speaking. One of the most common reasons is that we're simply searching for the right word, that perfect word that expresses exactly what we want to say.
Right? Sometimes it feels like the word is right there on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't quite grasp it. It's like trying to catch a slippery fish with your bare hands.
I love that analogy. And, sometimes the pressure of trying to be perfect can actually make those pauses even longer. We start worrying about grammar, pronunciation, and whether we're using the right vocabulary. And that can create a mental roadblock.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's like you're trying to juggle a dozen balls at once and you're terrified of dropping them all.
Yeah.
But maybe we need to remind ourselves that fluency isn't about perfection. It's about communication.
Absolutely. Think about it this way. When you're listening to someone speak, are you constantly analyzing their grammar and vocabulary? Or are you more focused on understanding their message, their thoughts, and their feelings?
Yeah, I definitely focus on the content of what they're saying, not on picking apart their grammar.
Yeah.
I think most people are more interested in the substance of the conversation rather than the technicalities.
Exactly. And that's a valuable lesson for us as English speakers. Instead of getting bogged down in the pursuit of perfection, let's focus on expressing ourselves clearly, confidently, and authentically. Mistakes are a natural part of the process. They're stepping stones on the path to fluency.
That's such a reassuring thought. It's like giving yourself permission to be human and to embrace the imperfections of language learning. So how can we train ourselves to speak more fluently without getting caught up in those perfectionist traps?
Well, it appears that speaking is a lot like any other skill. It requires practice and repetition. Just like athletes train their muscles to perform at their best, we can train the muscles we use for speech to move faster and more smoothly. It's about building muscle memory and coordination.
That's a fascinating perspective. It makes me think of those incredible pianists who can effortlessly play complex pieces. Their fingers dance across the keys with such precision and speed. It's amazing what the human body can achieve with dedicated practice.
Exactly. And just like pianists warm up their fingers before a performance, we can warm up our mouths for better speech. And one fun way to do that is with tongue twisters.
Oh, I love tongue twisters. They're so challenging, but also so silly. It's like a playful workout for your tongue. Do you have a favorite one?
One of my all-time favorites is She Sells Seashells by the Seashore. The shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure. So if she sells seashells on the seashore, then I'm sure she sells seashore shells. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah, that one is a real tongue twister. I always get tripped up on the she sells repetitions. But I can definitely see how practicing tongue twisters could help train our tongues to be more agile and to pronounce words more clearly.
Absolutely. Tongue twisters are like a fun boot camp for your articulation muscles. They help you develop precision and speed in your pronunciation.
Okay, so tongue twisters are in. But what about those pauses that happen when we're trying to figure out what to say next? Those moments when our brains seem to go blank and we're left scrambling for words. What can we do about those?
That's a common challenge. And studies show that one effective technique is to learn to think and speak in word chunks, also known as phrases, rather than individual words. It's like taking bigger steps instead of a series of tiny ones.
Word chunks. Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Of course. Instead of thinking, I think that, try thinking, I think that as a single unit. Or instead of, in my opinion, think, in my opinion. By grouping words together, we can reduce the number of mental pauses and speak more fluidly. It's like creating a mental shortcut for our brains.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's like prepackaging our thoughts for smoother delivery.
Hmm.
Are there any specific word chunks that you recommend practicing?
Definitely. There are many common English phrases that can be incredibly useful. For example, you can practice using phrases like, I agree with you, that's a good point, I see what you mean, or I understand your perspective. These are building blocks of conversation that can help you navigate social interactions more smoothly.
Those are all really practical phrases that I can definitely start incorporating into my daily conversations. I can already see how using word chunks could help me sound more natural and fluent. It's like having a secret weapon for smoother communication.
Exactly. It's a powerful technique that can really elevate your speaking skills. It's about training your brain to think in terms of meaningful units of language rather than getting bogged down in individual words.
Okay, I'm definitely going to start paying more attention to word chunks. But what about those moments when you're in the middle of a sentence and your mind just goes blank? You know that feeling when you're searching for the right word, but it's like your brain has suddenly decided to take a nap? What do we do in those situations?
We've all been there.
Yeah.
And it appears that using placeholder words can be a lifesaver in those situations. These are words like, well, so, like, I mean, or actually, they buy you a little time to think without interrupting the flow of the conversation.
Yeah, those are the words that I sometimes feel self-conscious about using. I feel like I overuse and like, especially when I'm nervous or trying to speak quickly. But I guess these serve a purpose.
They absolutely do. Everyone uses filler words to some extent. The key is to be mindful of how often you use them and to try to vary your choices whenever possible. Instead of relying on or like all the time, try experimenting with other placeholder words to add more variety and sophistication to your speech.
That's a great tip. I'm going to try to expand my repertoire of placeholder words and use them more strategically. But what about the advice to just start speaking and let your brain catch up? Doesn't that sometimes lead to rambling and incoherent sentences? I've definitely had those moments where I started talking without a clear plan and ended up going down a rabbit hole of nonsensical thoughts.
I understand what you mean. It can be a bit like jumping into a pool without checking the depth first. Sometimes you land gracefully, and other times you end up belly flopping. But there's also something incredibly liberating about just letting go and allowing the words to flow. It can help us break free from the fear of making mistakes and unlock a more spontaneous and natural way of speaking.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like giving yourself permission to be imperfect and to
Correct.
embrace the messiness of the creative process.
Exactly. And sometimes those moments of unplanned rambling can actually lead to surprising insights and connections. It's like you're exploring a new territory without a map, and you never know what treasures you might stumble upon along the way.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. It's about trusting the journey and allowing ourselves to be surprised by the unexpected twists and turns of language.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the adventure of communication.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired to take more risks with my speaking and to see where the words take me. Are there any other techniques we can explore to unlock this fluency superpower?
There are so many fascinating techniques to discover, and one that I find particularly intriguing is the power of visualization. It appears that visualizing the words you want to say before you speak can be incredibly helpful in accessing those words more easily.
Visualizing, like creating mental pictures in my mind.
Yeah.
I've never thought about applying that to speaking before.
Exactly. Think about what you want to say and try to create a mental image of it. It can be a literal image like picturing a scene or an object, or a more abstract representation of the concept you want to convey. By engaging more of your brain in the speaking process, you're creating multiple pathways to access the words you need.
So, for example, if I wanted to talk about my recent vacation, I might picture the beach, the palm trees swaying in the breeze, the delicious food I ate, and the laughter I shared with my friends and family.
Yes, exactly. By creating those vivid mental images, you're activating more of your sensory memories and making the experience more real for both you and your listener. It's like painting a picture with your words.
That's such a cool technique. I can see how it would make speaking more engaging and memorable. It's like adding a multisensory dimension to language.
Absolutely. It's about tapping into the power of your imagination to enhance your communication skills.
Okay, I'm definitely adding visualization to my fluency toolkit.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating way to blend creativity and language. What about shadowing? I've heard that technique mentioned before, but I'm not quite sure how it works.
Shadowing is a fantastic technique that involves listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say as closely as possible, almost like you're their shadow. It's like a vocal mimicry exercise that helps you internalize the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation patterns of natural speech.
So I'd find a recording of someone speaking English, maybe a podcast or an audiobook, and just try to mirror their voice.
Exactly. And here's the key. Try to do it without stopping or pausing. Even if you make a mistake, just keep going and try to stay in sync with the speaker's pace.
That sounds like a real challenge. But I can see how it would force me to think and speak more quickly and to pay closer attention to the nuances of pronunciation. It's like a workout for my listening and speaking skills at the same time.
It is, and it can be incredibly rewarding to hear yourself starting to sound more and more like the speaker you're shadowing. It's a great way to develop a more authentic and natural accent.
Okay, I'm adding shadowing to my list of fluency-boosting exercises. It sounds like a really effective way to immerse myself in the sounds of the language. What about self-correction? Is it always a good thing to correct ourselves when we make a mistake while speaking? Or can it sometimes hinder our fluency?
That's a great question. And, self-correction can be a bit of a double-edged sword. It can be helpful to notice our mistakes so we can learn from them, but it can also interrupt the flow of conversation and make us sound hesitant.
So if I catch myself making a small grammar mistake, is it better to just keep talking rather than stopping to correct myself? I know I have a tendency to overthink things and get stuck in a cycle of self-criticism, which definitely doesn't help my fluency.
I understand that tendency, and it appears that in most cases, it's better to prioritize fluency over perfection. If you make a minor mistake that doesn't affect the clarity of your message, just let it go and keep speaking. Remember, the goal is to communicate effectively, not to be a walking grammar textbook.
That's a relief to hear. It takes some of the pressure off and allows me to focus on the joy of expressing myself rather than getting bogged down in the fear of making mistakes.
Exactly. Embrace the imperfections and allow yourself to learn and grow from them. That's how we develop true fluency.
Okay, I'm feeling more relaxed about grammar already. It's all about finding the right balance between accuracy and flow. What about those moments when you just can't seem to find the right word in English? It's like your brain suddenly goes on strike and refuses to cooperate. Do you have any tips for overcoming those frustrating moments of brain freeze?
Those moments can be so frustrating. And it appears that a simple but effective strategy is to replace difficult words with simpler ones. It's better to communicate your message clearly with words you're comfortable using than to stumble over a word you're not quite sure about.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Sometimes I get so caught up in trying to sound impressive or sophisticated that I end up using words that I don't fully understand, which can lead to awkward pauses and miscommunications. It's like trying to wear a pair of shoes that are 2 sizes too small.
I love that analogy. It's about finding the right fit for your language. And sometimes that means opting for simplicity and clarity over complexity and obscurity. So if you're struggling to find the perfect word, ask yourself, what's a simpler way to say this? Or is there a more common word that conveys the same meaning?
That's a great tip. I'm going to try to be more conscious of choosing words that I feel confident and comfortable using, even if they're not the most impressive or academic words in my vocabulary. It's all about prioritizing effective communication.
Exactly. It's about finding your authentic voice and expressing yourself in a way that feels natural and effortless.
Okay, I'm all about embracing simplicity and authenticity. It's like decluttering my language and focusing on the words that truly matter. What about sentence starters? I've heard that those can be helpful for speaking more fluently. How do they work?
Sentence starters are like little linguistic life rafts that can help you navigate the sometimes choppy waters of conversation. They provide a framework for launching into a sentence, even if you're not entirely sure where it's going.
Can you give me some examples of sentence starters that I can try?
Of course, phrases like, I think that, the reason is, what I mean is, for example, in my experience, or from my perspective, can be incredibly helpful for getting a sentence rolling. It's like having a pre-built foundation that you can build upon.
Oh, I see. It's like having a mental template for structuring my thoughts and getting the words flowing. It takes some of the pressure off trying to come up with the perfect opening every time.
Exactly. Sentence starters give you a starting point and buy you a little time to think about what you want to say next. It's like having a little mental buffer to prevent those awkward silences.
Do you have any favorite sentence starters that you use a lot? I'm always looking for new ways to spice up my language.
One of my go-to sentence starters is, in my experience, because it allows me to share my personal perspective and connect with the listener on a more relatable level.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
I like to use "to be honest" because it signals that I'm about to share something authentic and from the heart. And sometimes I use, as far as I'm concerned, to express my opinion in a more assertive way.
Excellent examples. The key is to find sentence starters that feel natural to you and that you can use comfortably in different situations. It's about building a toolbox of language that you can access easily and effortlessly.
I love that image of a language toolbox. It's like we're collecting all these useful tools and techniques to help us become more confident and fluent speakers.
Exactly. It's about empowering ourselves with the language we need to express ourselves fully and authentically.
Okay, I'm excited to start building my own fluency toolbox. What about practicing with a timer? I've heard that can be helpful, but I'm not sure how it works.
Practicing with the timer can be a really fun and effective way to challenge yourself and build your fluency muscles. It appears that setting a timer for, say, 30 seconds or a minute and trying to speak about a topic without stopping until the timer goes off can help you develop a smoother flow and train your brain to think more quickly.
So I just choose a random topic and start talking. It sounds a bit like a mini public speaking challenge, but just for myself.
Exactly. It's a great way to practice thinking on your feet and expressing yourself spontaneously. It doesn't really matter what you talk about. The key is to keep talking and to resist the urge to stop or pause.
That sounds a bit scary, but also kind of exciting. It's like a mental sprint for my language skills.
It is, and the more you practice, the less scary it will become. You'll start to feel more comfortable with the silences and more confident in your ability to fill them with words.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. I'm always up for a good challenge, and I think this could be a really fun way to push myself outside of my comfort zone. What about volume? Does speaking louder have any impact on our fluency? I know I tend to mumble when I'm nervous, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
It's an interesting question. And studies show that speaking with more volume can actually help reduce hesitation and improve fluency. When you project your voice, you project confidence, and that confidence can help you speak more smoothly and naturally.
That's really fascinating. So it's not just about being heard, it's also about the psychological impact of using our voices more powerfully. It's like when you stand up straight and make eye contact, it conveys a sense of confidence and authority.
Exactly. It's about commanding attention and owning your space in the conversation. When you speak with conviction, your words flow more naturally. It's like your voice is paving the way for your thoughts.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that when I'm feeling shy or unsure of myself, I tend to speak more softly and hesitantly. It's almost like I'm trying to shrink into the background and avoid being noticed. But maybe by consciously focusing on speaking louder, I can shift that dynamic and project more confidence, which in turn could boost my fluency.
It's a powerful technique. And it appears that by changing our external behavior, we can often influence our internal state. It's like the saying, fake it till you make it. By acting confident, we can start to feel more confident, and that can have a ripple effect on all aspects of our communication.
Okay, I'm ready to turn up the volume and see what happens. It's amazing how something as simple as speaking louder can have such a profound impact on our fluency and confidence.
It's a reminder that our voices are powerful instruments, and we can use them to create the impact we want to make in the world.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Our voices are indeed powerful tools for self-expression and connection. What other fun and creative techniques can we explore to enhance our fluency?
Well, have you ever considered channeling your inner news reporter?
A news reporter. You've got me intrigued. Tell me more.
It appears that reading the news aloud, just like a professional news anchor, can be a really effective way to practice speaking clearly, quickly, and with a natural flow.
So I'd find a news article online or in a newspaper and just read it out loud as if I'm delivering the latest headlines.
Exactly. The key is to focus on maintaining a consistent pace, clear pronunciation, and engaging delivery. It's about practicing those skills that news reporters have mastered, conveying information in a way that is both informative and captivating.
That sounds like a fun challenge.
Yeah.
I can already picture myself sitting at my desk with a pretend microphone, reporting on the latest events with a serious face and a clear voice.
Yeah.
It's like a fluency boot camp, but with a touch of theatrical flair.
I love that image. And who knows, maybe you'll discover a hidden talent for broadcasting.
Maybe I'll start my own podcast called Fluency News Network.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm adding news reporter practice to my growing list of fluency boosting activities. What about those little filler sounds that we all use sometimes, like and I know we talked about placeholder words earlier, but these seem a bit different. Are they always a bad thing? Or do they serve a purpose in conversation?
That's a great observation. And those little sounds, sometimes called discourse markers, are actually more nuanced than we might think. It appears that they're not always the enemies of fluency.
Really? I thought they were just signs of hesitation or lack of confidence.
They can be, but they can also serve a variety of functions in conversation. They can signal that you're thinking, that you're processing information, or that you're searching for the right word. They can also be used to keep the listener engaged, to create a sense of anticipation, or to signal a transition in the conversation.
So they're not always the fluency villains that we make them out to be. Maybe it's all about using them strategically and in moderation.
Exactly. Think of them as tools to help you navigate the flow of conversation, not as crutches to lean on. The key is to be aware of how you're using them and to make sure you're not overusing them to the point where they become distracting or disruptive.
Okay, that's a really helpful perspective. Instead of trying to eliminate those little sounds completely, I'm going to focus on using them more intentionally and mindfully. What about rapid fire Q&A practice? I've heard that can be helpful for improving fluency. How does that work?
Rapid-fire Q&A is a fantastic way to challenge yourself and to develop the ability to think and speak quickly. It appears that by engaging in fast-paced question and answer exercises, we can train our brains to retrieve information more efficiently and to formulate responses more spontaneously.
So I'd need a partner to ask me questions, and I'd have to answer as quickly as possible without much time to think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to make it even more challenging, you can try to answer in full sentences rather than just single words or phrases. It's like a mental agility workout for your language skills.
Wow, that sounds intense, but also really fun. It's like a game show for fluency, where the prize is smoother and more confident speaking. I'm definitely adding that to my fluency workout routine. What about body language? Does how we use our bodies play a role in speaking fluently? I know that when I'm nervous, I tend to freeze up and my body language becomes really stiff and awkward.
That's a great observation. And, you know, body language plays a much bigger role in communication than we often realize. It appears that using your hands and arms when you speak can actually help you think and speak more quickly.
Really? So being more expressive with my hands can actually boost my fluency. I never would have guessed that.
It's true. When you use gestures, you're engaging more of your brain in the communication process, and that can help you access words and ideas more easily. It's like your body is helping your brain find the right words.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about looking more animated or engaging, it's about actually helping our brains work better.
Exactly. Think of it as giving your brain a little extra boost by involving your body in the process. It's like creating a synergy between your thoughts, words, and movements.
Okay, I'm going to try to be more conscious of my hand gestures when I'm speaking. It's amazing how these seemingly small things can have such a big impact on our fluency. What about speaking games? Are those just for fun, or can they actually help us improve our English?
Speaking games are a fantastic way to practice fluency in a fun and engaging way. They take the pressure off of formal language learning and allow you to experiment with language in a more playful and relaxed environment.
Oh, I love playing games.
Yeah,
Do you have any favorites that you recommend for practicing fluency?
there are so many great games out there, but one classic that I always enjoy is Just a Minute. The premise is simple. You have to speak about a topic for a full minute without hesitating, repeating yourself, or deviating from the topic. It's a real test of your fluency and your ability to think on your feet.
Oh, I've played that game before, and it's so challenging. It's amazing how difficult it can be to speak for a whole minute without pausing or repeating yourself.
Yeah.
But it's also a lot of fun, especially when you're playing with a group of friends. It's like a party game for language lovers.
Exactly. And it's a great way to build your confidence and your ability to think creatively under pressure.
Yeah, I'm always up for good game night. What about grammar? I know it's important, but does focusing too much on grammar sometimes get in the way of fluency? I feel like I sometimes get so caught up in trying to be grammatically perfect that I end up sounding robotic and unnatural.
I understand that feeling. And you know, it appears that worrying too much about grammar can actually hinder our fluency. When we're constantly overthinking every sentence and trying to avoid mistakes, we can end up sounding hesitant and stilted.
So it's better to prioritize fluency over perfection, at least when we're speaking.
Exactly. Of course, grammar is important, but it's not the only thing that matters when it comes to communication. Fluency is about expressing yourself effectively, and sometimes that means letting go of a little grammatical perfection in favor of a more natural and spontaneous flow.
I know I've definitely fallen into the trap of trying to be a walking grammar textbook, which ultimately hinders my ability to communicate freely and authentically. It's like trying to dance while wearing a suit of armor.
I love that analogy. It's about finding the freedom to move and groove with the language.
Okay, I'm going to try to loosen up and embrace the imperfections of my grammar. It's about communicating from the heart, not from a textbook. What about describing what we see? How can that help with fluency? It seems like a simple activity, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
It's a surprisingly effective technique. It appears that practicing describing everyday objects can be a fantastic way to boost your vocabulary, improve your sentence structure, and develop a more fluid way of speaking.
So I could just pick up a random object like my coffee mug or my phone and start describing it in detail.
Exactly. Talk about its color, its shape, its texture, its function. The more details you can provide, the better. And try to use a variety of adjectives and descriptive phrases to make your descriptions more vivid and engaging. It's like creating a verbal portrait of the object.
That sounds like a really fun and creative exercise, and it's something I can do anywhere, anytime, without needing any special materials or equipment. It's like a mini mindfulness practice, but with language.
I love that perspective. It's about bringing a sense of awareness and curiosity to the world around us and using language to express our observations. It's a wonderful way to practice fluency while also appreciating the beauty in the everyday.
I'm definitely going to try that. What about thinking in English? Is that important for fluency? I know that I tend to think in my native language and then translate everything into English, which I imagine can slow me down.
You're right, translating can definitely create a mental bottleneck. And it appears that training yourself to think in English can be incredibly helpful for improving your fluency and spontaneity. When you think in English, you're bypassing that translation step and allowing your thoughts to flow more directly into words.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do I actually train myself to think in English? It seems like a really difficult thing to do.
It can be challenging at first, but it's a skill that you can develop with practice. One effective strategy is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. Surround yourself with English. Listen to English music and podcasts, watch English movies and TV shows, read English books and articles, and even try talking to yourself in English.
So it's all about creating an English-speaking environment for myself and exposing my brain to the language in as many ways as possible.
Exactly. The more you immerse yourself in English, the more natural it will become for you to think in the language. It's like training your brain to switch from one operating system to another.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into the world of English immersion. It sounds like an adventure for my brain. What about reading aloud? I used to do that a lot when I was a child, but I haven't done it much as an adult. How does reading aloud contribute to fluency?
Reading aloud is a wonderful way to engage with language on multiple levels, visually, auditorily, and even kinesthetically. It appears that reading aloud every day, even for just a few minutes, can significantly boost your fluency, improve your pronunciation, and enhance your overall comfort with the language.
So it's not just about reading silently in my head, it's about actually vocalizing the words and experiencing the sounds of the language.
Exactly. Reading aloud forces you to pay attention to pronunciation, intonation, and the rhythm of the language. It's like a workout for your vocal cords and your brain at the same time.
I can see how that would be helpful. It's like giving my mouth a workout with English sounds and training my brain to connect the written word with the spoken word more seamlessly.
Exactly, and it's a really enjoyable way to practice. You can choose any material you like, a novel, a poem, a magazine article, or even just a blog post. The key is to choose something that interests you and that you'll enjoy reading aloud.
Okay, I'm adding reading aloud to my daily routine. It's a simple yet powerful technique that I can easily incorporate into my life. What about sentence complexity? Should I aim for simple sentences or more complex ones when I'm speaking? I sometimes worry about sounding too simplistic or too childish if I only use short sentences.
That's a common concern, and it appears that when it comes to fluency, it's often helpful to start with simple sentences and then gradually build up to more complex ones as you gain confidence and experience.
So don't try to cram too much information into one sentence. It's better to break things down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Exactly. Think of it like building a house. You start with a solid foundation and then gradually add the walls, the roof, and all the finishing touches. Simple sentences are the foundation of fluent speech. Once you're comfortable with those, you can start adding more complexity and nuance with conjunctions, clauses, and more sophisticated grammatical structures.
That's a great analogy. It's about building up my language skills gradually and systematically, starting with the basics, and then adding more elaborate elements as I progress.
Exactly. It's a journey of discovery and growth.
I'm excited to embark on that journey. What about recording ourselves speaking? Is that helpful or just embarrassing? I'm not sure I'm ready to hear what my voice sounds like.
I understand that hesitation. But recording yourself speaking can actually be a really valuable tool for improving your fluency. It appears that by listening back to our own voices, we can gain objective insights into our speaking patterns, identify areas where we tend to pause or make mistakes, and track our progress over time. It's like having a personal fluency coach in your pocket.
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. Maybe it's not about judgment or criticism, but rather about observation and self-awareness.
Exactly. Think of it as a scientific experiment where you're gathering data about your own speech patterns.
Okay, maybe I'll give it a try. What should I listen for specifically when I play back the recording?
Pay attention to the overall flow of your speech. Do you sound hesitant or uncertain? Are you making a lot of filler sounds? Are you pausing in awkward places? Are you rushing through certain words or phrases? Are you pronouncing words correctly?
And then I can use that information to work on those specific areas and improve my fluency.
Exactly. It's like having a personalized roadmap for your language learning journey.
Okay, I'm starting to see the value in recording myself. It's a bit like watching a video replay of your athletic performance. It can help you identify areas for improvement and fine-tune your technique. What about vocabulary? Does having a bigger vocabulary actually help with fluency? I sometimes feel like I'm constantly struggling to find the right words to express myself, which can lead to those dreaded pauses.
You're not alone in that feeling. And you know it appears that vocabulary plays a crucial role in fluency. Studies show that the more words you know, the less likely you are to pause while speaking. It's like having a wider range of colors to choose from when you're painting a picture. You can express yourself more vividly and precisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If I have a richer vocabulary, I'm less likely to get stuck searching for the right word, which can help me maintain a smoother flow in my speech.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that vocabulary isn't just about memorizing lists of words. It's about understanding how to use those words effectively in context. It's about developing a deep understanding of the nuances of meaning and how words work together to create different effects.
So how do we go about expanding our vocabulary in a way that actually benefits our fluency?
It's a question many English learners grapple with, and it appears that one of the most effective ways to expand your vocabulary is through reading. When you encounter a new word in a book, an article, or even just a social media post, try to figure out its meaning from the context first. Then look it up in a dictionary to confirm your understanding and to explore any subtle shades of meaning that you might have missed.
That's great advice. I often just skim over unfamiliar words when I'm reading, but I can see how taking the time to really understand those words could enrich my vocabulary and make me a more confident speaker. It's like unlocking hidden treasures in the language.
I love that image. And once you've learned a new word, the key is to use it.
Yeah.
Try incorporating it into your speaking and writing as often as you can.
Okay.
The more you use a word, the more it becomes a part of your active vocabulary, readily available when you need it.
So it's not just about passively absorbing new words, it's about actively integrating them into my language repertoire.
Exactly. Think of it as building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes.
Okay, I'm going to start paying more attention to the words I encounter in my reading and make a conscious effort to use them in my own speaking and writing. It's like turning my reading material into a vocabulary playground. What about singing? Can belting out our favorite tunes actually help us speak more fluently? I've always loved singing, even though I'm not a very good singer, and I'm curious to know if it has any linguistic benefits.
It's a wonderful question, and it appears that singing in English can be a fun and surprisingly effective way to improve your rhythm, intonation, and overall flow. When you sing, you're naturally focusing on the musicality of the language, which can help you develop a more natural and expressive way of speaking.
So karaoke night is officially a fluency-boosting activity. I love it.
Absolutely. And you don't have to be a professional singer to reap the benefits. Just choose songs you enjoy and sing along with gusto. Don't worry about hitting the high notes or impressing anyone. Just focus on enjoying the music and letting the words flow.
That's great advice. It takes the pressure off and allows me to just have fun with the language. What about imitating native speakers? Is that a good way to improve fluency? I sometimes find myself trying to copy the accent and intonation of actors or podcast hosts that I admire.
It appears that imitation can be a powerful tool for language learning. By observing and mimicking the speech patterns of native speakers, we can internalize those patterns and gradually integrate them into our own speaking. It's like learning by osmosis, absorbing the nuances of the language through repeated exposure.
So it's like finding a language role model and trying to emulate their style.
Exactly. Choose someone whose accent and speaking style you admire and listen carefully to how they speak. Pay attention to their pronunciation, their intonation, their rhythm, and even their use of pauses and fillers. Then try to mimic those patterns in your own speaking. It's like an acting exercise for your voice.
That's a really fun way to think about it. So like I'm playing the role of a fluent English speaker, and the more I practice, the more convincing my performance will become.
Exactly. And just like with any acting role, the key is to practice, practice, practice. The more you immerse yourself in the sounds and rhythms of natural English speech, the more those patterns will become ingrained in your own speaking.
Okay, I'm going to start paying closer attention to how native speakers sound and try to incorporate some of their techniques into my own speaking. It's like giving my language a stylish makeover. What about answering questions? Does how we answer questions affect our fluency? I know that I sometimes give really short one-word answers, especially when I'm feeling nervous or unsure of myself.
That's a very common tendency, especially in situations where we feel pressured or self-conscious. And, it appears that answering questions in full sentences can actually help improve your fluency.
Really. So instead of just saying yes or no, I should try to elaborate and provide more context in my answers. It seems counterintuitive that speaking more would lead to greater fluency.
It might seem counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it. When you answer in full sentences, you're forcing yourself to think more deeply about the question, to organize your thoughts more effectively, and to practice using a wider range of vocabulary and grammatical structures. It's like turning a simple reflex into a mini speech.
That's a great way to put it. It's about turning those brief reactive responses into opportunities for more expansive and articulate expression. It's like expanding the canvas of the conversation.
Exactly. And the more you practice answering in full sentences, the more natural and effortless it will become. You'll start to see those questions as invitations to share your thoughts and ideas more fully rather than just as prompts for simple yes or no answers.
Okay, I'm going to start challenging myself to answer questions more thoughtfully and completely, even in casual conversations. It's a great way to flex my language muscles and build my fluency confidence. What about the fear of making mistakes? I know we've touched on this before, but it's such a common obstacle for language learners, and I'm wondering if you have any additional insights or advice on how to overcome that fear and speak more freely.
It's a question that resonates with almost every language learner. And, it appears that one of the biggest obstacles to fluency is indeed the fear of making mistakes. We worry about being judged, about sounding foolish, about not being understood. But it's important to remember that mistakes are an inevitable part of the learning process. They're not signs of failure. They're signs of growth and progress.
That's a really reassuring perspective. It's like giving myself permission to be imperfect and to embrace the messiness of the learning journey.
Exactly. And the more we can shift our perspective from seeing mistakes as something to be ashamed of to seeing them as valuable learning opportunities, the more freely and confidently we'll be able to speak.
So it's about reframing our relationship with mistakes and seeing them as stepping stones on the path to fluency rather than as roadblocks.
Absolutely. And it appears that one way to do that is to practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself when you make a mistake. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just acknowledge it, learn from it, and move on.
That's such an important reminder. We often hold ourselves to such high standards, especially when it comes to language learning. But maybe it's time to give ourselves a break and embrace the imperfections of the process. What about the balance between speaking and listening? Is it better to speak more or to listen more when you're learning a language? I'm always torn between wanting to absorb as much input as possible and wanting to actively practice my speaking skills.
It's a great question. And the answer, like many things in language learning, is that it depends on your individual goals and preferences.
Right.
But it appears that if you want to improve your fluency specifically, it's essential to prioritize speaking over listening.
So it's not enough to just passively listen to English. I need to actively engage in conversations and put those speaking skills to the test.
Exactly. Think of it like learning to play a sport. You can watch all the games you want, but until you get out on the field and start playing yourself, you won't develop the skills and reflexes you need to excel. Speaking is an active skill that requires practice and repetition. The more you speak, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
That's a great analogy. I definitely need to spend more time on the language field and less time on the sidelines. But what if I don't have anyone to practice with?
That's a common challenge, but there are still plenty of ways to practice speaking, even if you don't have a conversation partner. You can talk to yourself out loud, practice giving presentations to an imaginary audience, record yourself speaking and listen back to it, or even just think out loud in English throughout the day.
So it's all about finding creative ways to use the language and get those words flowing, even if I'm just talking to myself.
Exactly. The key is to make speaking a regular habit, even if it's just for a few minutes each day. It's about creating opportunities for active language use, even in the absence of a conversation partner.
Okay. I'm committed to finding ways to speak more English, even if it means having conversations with my plants or narrating my daily activities out loud. What about thinking speed? Does how quickly we think affect how quickly we speak? I know that I sometimes feel like my brain is moving at a snail's pace, especially when I'm trying to speak in English.
It's a fascinating connection, and studies show that thinking speed and speaking speed are indeed intertwined. It appears that if you want to speak faster, you need to train yourself to think faster. It's about improving your cognitive processing speed and agility.
So it's like a mental workout for my brain.
Exactly. And just like with any workout, it takes time and effort to build those mental muscles. But the more you challenge yourself to think more quickly and efficiently, the faster and more effortlessly your words will flow.
But how do I actually do that? It's not like I can just tell my brain to speed up.
There are many fun and engaging ways to train your brain to think more quickly. It appears that activities like playing brain games, solving puzzles, learning a new skill, or even just reading challenging material can all help to sharpen your cognitive abilities and improve your processing speed.
So it's about keeping my brain active and engaged, constantly challenging it with new information and stimulating activities.
Exactly. The more you challenge your brain, the faster and more efficiently it will become. It's like taking your brain to the gym.
I love that analogy. I'm ready to pump some mental iron and get my brain in tip-top shape. What about using connectors in our speech? I know those are important for writing, but I'm not sure how they relate to fluency.
Connectors are like the glue that holds our sentences and ideas together. It appears that by using a variety of connectors in our speech, we can create a more cohesive and engaging flow, making it easier for our listeners to follow our train of thought.
Can you give me some examples of connectors that I can start using in my conversations?
Of course, words and phrases like and, but, because, so, although, however, in addition, for example, on the other hand, and as a result, are all excellent examples of connectors that can help you create smoother transitions between ideas and sentences. They're like signposts that guide your listener through your thoughts.
Oh, I see. So instead of just stringing together a bunch of short, choppy sentences, I can use these connectors to create a more sophisticated and interconnected flow. It's like weaving a tapestry of words rather than just stacking up bricks.
I love that analogy. Connectors help you create a more nuanced and layered conversation, which can make your speaking more engaging and enjoyable for both you and your listener.
Okay, I'm going to start paying more attention to how I use connectors in my speech and try to incorporate a wider variety of them. It's like adding a dash of linguistic spice to my conversations. What about conversation fillers? We talked about placeholder words earlier, but I'm wondering if conversation fillers serve a different purpose. Are they always a bad thing? Or can they sometimes be helpful?
It's a great question, and conversation fillers can be a bit of a gray area. They can sometimes be seen as signs of hesitation or lack of confidence, but they can also serve a variety of useful functions in conversation.
Can you give me some examples of conversation fillers that I can use without sounding too hesitant or awkward?
Of course, phrases like, "That's a good question. Let me think for a moment." Well, to be honest. Or, "That's an interesting point," can all be used as conversation fillers to signal that you're processing information, gathering your thoughts, or simply acknowledging what the other person has said.
So it's not about eliminating them completely, but rather using them strategically and in moderation. It's about finding that sweet spot where they enhance a conversation rather than detract from it.
Exactly. Think of them as tools to help you navigate the flow of conversation, not as crutches to lean on. The key is to be aware of how you're using them and to make sure you're not overusing them to the point where they become distracting or disruptive.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to try to be more mindful of my use of conversation fillers and to choose them carefully, just like I would choose the right spices to add to a dish. What about making speaking a regular habit? How important is that for fluency? I know that consistency is key for any skill, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how to make speaking English a more integral part of my daily life.
It's a question that lies at the heart of fluency development. And, building a speaking habit is absolutely essential if you want to see significant improvement in your fluency. The more you speak, the more comfortable and confident you'll become, and the more naturally the words will flow.
So it's not enough to just study grammar rules and memorize vocabulary words.
Yeah,
I need to actually use the language in real conversations on a regular basis.
exactly. It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You can study music theory and learn all the notes, but until you actually pick up the instrument and start playing, you won't develop true fluency and expressiveness. Speaking is a skill that needs to be honed through practice and repetition.
That's a great analogy. I need to treat English like a musical instrument and make time to play it every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. But sometimes it's hard to stay motivated, especially when I'm feeling tired or busy. Do you have any tips for staying consistent with my speaking practice?
It appears that one helpful strategy is to set realistic goals and to find ways to make speaking English enjoyable.
Okay.
Instead of trying to speak for hours every day, start with just 10 or 15 minutes and gradually increase the duration as you feel more comfortable. And choose activities that you find fun and engaging, like watching movies, listening to music, or talking to friends.
That's great advice. It's about making speaking English a part of my life, not just another chore on my to-do list.
Yeah.
What about repeating key ideas? Is that a good strategy for speaking more fluently, or does it just make me sound repetitive? I sometimes find myself rephrasing things multiple times because I'm not sure what else to say.
It's a common dilemma, and it appears that repeating key ideas can actually be a very effective strategy for maintaining fluency and avoiding those awkward pauses.
Really? So it's okay to say the same thing in multiple ways?
Absolutely. Think of it as a way to emphasize important points, to clarify your message, and to buy yourself a little extra time to think about what you want to say next. It's like giving your listener multiple opportunities to catch the ball.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. It takes the pressure off of feeling like I have to come up with something completely new and brilliant every time I open my mouth.
What about role playing? Is that just for actors, or can it help us improve our English fluency? I've always been a bit shy about role playing, but I'm willing to try it if it can help me speak more confidently.
Role-playing can be a fantastic tool for language learning. It appears that by acting out different scenarios, we can challenge ourselves to use a wider range of vocabulary and grammatical structures to think more creatively on our feet and to develop a greater sense of comfort and confidence in different social situations. So I could pretend to be ordering food at a restaurant, checking into a hotel, asking for directions, or even giving a presentation at work.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless. And the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become speaking English in a variety of real-life situations. It's like giving yourself a dress rehearsal for the real world.
That sounds like a lot of fun. It's like improv for English fluency. I'm starting to see how all of these techniques, from tongue twisters to role-playing, can work together to create a more holistic and engaging approach to language learning.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for you and creating a learning experience that is both effective and enjoyable. What about speaking speed? Should I always try to speak as quickly as possible, or is there a balance between speed and clarity? That's an important consideration, and it appears that speaking speed isn't always about how fast you can talk. It's about finding a rhythm and pace that feels natural and comfortable for both you and your listener.
So it's not about trying to win a speed-talking competition.
Not necessarily. While it's great to challenge yourself to speak more quickly, sometimes it's also important to focus on clarity and pronunciation.
Okay.
It appears that sometimes the best way to speed up is to slow down.
Wait, what? Slow down to speed up. How does that work?
By practicing speaking slowly and deliberately, at first you can actually train your brain and mouth to work more efficiently. This can help you develop a more natural rhythm and flow in your speech, which will ultimately allow you to speak more quickly and fluently over time. It's like building a strong foundation before adding the fancy embellishments.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like learning to walk before you run, or learning to play the scales before tackling a complex musical piece. Okay, I'm willing to embrace the slow and steady approach. What about thinking in sound groups? I'm not familiar with that concept. How does it relate to fluency?
Thinking in sound groups or chunks of words is a fascinating technique that can help you develop a more natural and fluid way of speaking. It appears that instead of thinking about each individual word separately, you can train yourself to think about phrases as units of sound.
Can you explain what you mean by sound groups?
Yeah.
I'm having a bit of trouble visualizing it.
Of course. Let's take the sentence, I am going to the store, as an example. Instead of thinking, I am going to the store, try to think, I am going to the store as a single unit of sound. It's about grouping the words together based on how they sound naturally when spoken.
Oh, I see. So it's like creating a mental melody of the sentence where the words flow together seamlessly rather than being pronounced in isolation.
Exactly. This helps you develop a more rhythmic and connected way of speaking, which is essential for fluency. It's about training your brain to perceive and produce language in chunks rather than in individual words.
That's a really interesting concept. I'm going to try to be more mindful of sound groups when I'm speaking and see if it helps me sound more natural and fluid. It's like I'm composing music with my words.
I love that image. It's about finding the rhythm and melody in language. What about breathing? I know it sounds like a basic bodily function, but does it actually play a role in fluency? I've noticed that when I'm nervous, my breathing becomes shallow and erratic, which definitely doesn't help me speak clearly.
You're absolutely right. Breathing plays a much bigger role in speaking than we often realize.
Oh, yeah.
And it appears that taking deep, conscious breaths can help calm your nerves, improve your vocal control, and enhance your overall fluency.
So if I'm feeling anxious or overwhelmed, I should just take a few deep breaths to relax and regain my composure. It sounds so simple, yet I often forget to do it when I'm caught up in the moment.
It's a simple yet powerful technique. Deep breathing helps to oxygenate your brain and body, which can improve your focus, clarity, and overall sense of well-being. It also helps to regulate your heart rate and lower your blood pressure, which can counteract the physical symptoms of anxiety and nervousness. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to make a conscious effort to incorporate deep breathing into my daily routine and to practice it before any speaking situations that make me feel anxious. It's like giving myself a mini meditation session to calm my mind and body.
It's a wonderful way to create a sense of inner peace and to prepare yourself for speaking with confidence and clarity. What about speaking groups? Have you ever considered joining one? I've always been a bit intimidated by the idea, but I'm curious to know how they can help us improve our English. Speaking groups can be a fantastic resource for language learners. They provide a supportive and encouraging environment where you can practice your speaking skills with other people who are also on their language learning journeys.
So I'd find a group of people who are also learning English, and we'd all get together and practice speaking in a relaxed and informal setting.
That's right. It's a wonderful way to build your confidence, try out new vocabulary and grammar structures, and get feedback from others who understand the challenges of learning a new language.
It sounds like a great way to meet new people who share my passion for English and to create a sense of community around language learning. What kinds of things would we do in a speaking group? I imagine it would depend on the group, but I'm curious to hear about some common activities.
You're right, every speaking group is unique. But some common activities include discussions, debates, role-playing games, and even presentations. It's all about creating opportunities for authentic communication and interaction in English.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's probably less intimidating than speaking one-on-one with a tutor or teacher. It's like having a built-in support system of people who are going through the same learning process as you.
Exactly. And speaking groups can be a wonderful source of encouragement and motivation. It's inspiring to be around other people who are working towards similar goals and to celebrate each other's successes along the way.
Okay, I'm definitely going to look for speaking groups in my area. It's great to know that there are these communities of language learners out there who are eager to connect and practice their skills. What about the importance of practice? I know it's probably obvious, but how crucial is practice for achieving fluency? I'm always looking for ways to stay motivated and to make practice more integral part of my daily routine.
It appears that practice is absolutely essential for achieving fluency. It's the key that unlocks the door to smoother, more confident, and more natural-sounding speech. The more you speak, the better you'll become. It's a simple equation, but it's the foundation of language acquisition.
So it's not just about passively learning grammar rules and accumulating vocabulary words. It's about actively using the language in real conversations, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and gradually building up my fluency muscles over time.
Exactly. Think of it like learning to play a musical instrument. You can study music theory and learn all the notes, but until you actually pick up the instrument and start playing, you won't develop true fluency and expressiveness. Speaking is like playing music with your voice. It requires practice, dedication, and a willingness to embrace the imperfections of the learning process.
That's a beautiful analogy. I need to treat English like a musical instrument and make time to play it every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners who are on this journey to speaking without pausing? What words of wisdom can you offer to encourage and inspire them?
It appears that the most important message I can convey is to be patient with yourself and to enjoy the process. Learning a language takes time, effort, and a willingness to embrace the inevitable ups and downs of the journey. But it's also an incredibly rewarding experience that can open up new worlds of communication, connection, and understanding.
I couldn't agree more. It's a journey, not a destination. And the beauty of the journey lies in the constant exploration, discovery, and growth that comes with it.
Exactly. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and never stop learning. Language is a living, breathing thing, and there's always something new to discover.
And, um, It's incredibly common to have those moments where you're speaking and suddenly your mind goes blank, leaving you searching for the right word.
It happens to the best of us, Mike. It's a universal experience for English learners, and believe it or not, even native speakers get tripped up sometimes. So if you're nodding your head right now, know that you're not alone.
That's right, Lily. And that's why we're diving into a toolbox full of techniques and strategies to help everyone speak more fluently with fewer of those pesky pauses and hesitations. We'll be exploring everything from physical exercises to mental strategies and even some fun games and activities you can try.
It appears that speaking is a lot like physical exercise. You need to train those muscles for smoother, more efficient performance. And just as with any workout routine, consistency is key. We'll be giving you tips on how to integrate these techniques into your everyday English practice.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking the reasons behind those pauses. Why do we find ourselves hitting the brakes when we're trying to speak?
Well, sometimes it's simply because we need a moment to gather our thoughts or fully process what the other person is saying. But often it's rooted in the fear of making mistakes. We worry about saying the wrong word or messing up the grammar, and that fear can really trip us up.
That makes a lot of sense, Lily. Studies show that fluency is actually more important than perfection when it comes to effective communication. Think about it. Have you ever had a conversation with someone whose English was grammatically perfect, but incredibly slow and hesitant? It's hard to stay engaged, right?
Absolutely. It's like listening to a robot reciting a textbook. You lose interest quickly. Fluency, on the other hand, helps us connect with others, express ourselves clearly, and project confidence.
Okay, so how do we train our mouths for smoother, more fluent English? Let's talk about those physical exercises you mentioned earlier.
Well, just as an athlete warms up their muscles before a big game, we can warm up our mouths with simple exercises. One that's easy and effective is simply opening and closing your mouth as wide as you can, like you're yawning. Do this a few times to loosen up those jaw muscles.
I'm actually doing it right now, and you know what? It feels really good. What else can we do?
Another great exercise is to stick out your tongue as far as you can and then move it up and down and side to side. This helps improve your articulation, making your speech clearer and crisper.
I feel like a kid again doing this. It's surprisingly harder than it looks.
It's amazing how much we take our tongue for granted. And of course, we can't forget about tongue twisters.
Ah, yes, the classic tongue twister, a surefire way to trip over your words.
Well, actually, they're a fantastic way to improve your pronunciation and fluency by challenging you to articulate sounds clearly and quickly.
Do you have a favorite tongue twister, Lily?
Oh, I have so many, but one that always gets me is, she sells seashells by the seashore.
Right, let's try it together. She sells seashells by the seashore. See, I already messed up.
It takes practice, Mike, but trust me, with repetition, you'll find yourself getting faster and smoother.
Okay, so we've warmed up our mouth muscles. Now, let's shift gears and talk about mental strategies. How can we train our brains for more fluent speech?
One of the most effective techniques is to think in word chunks rather than individual words.
Word chunks, what are those?
Word chunks are common phrases or groups of words we use all the time. For example, instead of thinking, I think that, you can think, I think that as a single unit.
I see, so it's like pre-packaging our thoughts for smoother delivery.
Exactly. And by using these prepackaged chunks, we can reduce the amount of mental processing required while speaking, which leads to greater fluency.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Could you give us some more examples of these word chunks?
Absolutely. Some common ones include, in my opinion, for example, on the other hand, and as a matter of fact. Practicing these phrases can make a big difference.
Okay, so I can practice saying these word chunks out loud to get comfortable with them. But what happens when I'm in the middle of a sentence and the right word chunk escapes me? What do I do then?
That's where those handy placeholder words come in.
Placeholder words. Tell me more.
Placeholder words are those little words like, well, so, and I mean. They don't carry much meaning on their own, but they're brilliant for filling those gaps in your speech and maintaining the flow of conversation.
So it's like buying yourself a little time while your brain catches up, right?
Exactly. And here's a fascinating fact. Studies show that using placeholder words can actually make you sound more natural and engaging.
Really? I always thought they were a sign of, well, less polished speaking.
Not at all. They're a natural part of spoken language, and used effectively, they can boost your fluency and confidence.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light here. So we've got word chunks and placeholder words in our fluency toolkit. What other mental strategies can we explore?
One that might surprise you is the idea of speaking before you think.
Wait, what? You're suggesting we just start talking without thinking about what we're going to say?
Well, not exactly. It's more about shifting your focus from perfection to fluency. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to craft the perfect sentence that we end up overthinking and hesitating.
I do that all the time.
It happens to the best of us, Mike. But by giving yourself permission to start speaking, even if you haven't perfectly formulated the sentence in your mind, you can actually train your brain to think more quickly and spontaneously.
So it's like taking a leap of faith and trusting that our brains will catch up.
In a way, yes. Trust me, your brain is far more capable than you think. It will rise to the occasion.
Okay, I'm willing to give it a try. What other techniques can help us unlock greater fluency?
Another powerful technique is visualization. Before you speak, try visualizing the words.
Visualizing my words. I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
It's all about creating mental pictures of what you want to say. Imagine the scene, the objects, the people involved. Even try to visualize the emotions you want to convey.
So it's like creating a movie in my mind before I speak.
Precisely. By doing this, you're essentially giving your brain a head start. It's like providing a blueprint for your words to follow.
That's fascinating. I've never thought about it that way before. How does that translate into more fluent speech?
Well, when you have a clear picture in your mind, it becomes much easier to access the words and phrases you need to express yourself. And because you've already seen it in your head, you're less likely to hesitate or fumble for the right words.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try this visualization technique. What other advanced techniques can we add to our arsenal?
One that's particularly effective is shadowing.
Shadowing. Like following someone around in the shadows.
Not quite. In this context, shadowing means listening to native speech recordings and repeating what you hear immediately.
Ah, so it's like mimicking their speech patterns.
Exactly. You try to match the speaker's pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm as closely as possible.
And how does this boost fluency?
Well, by shadowing native speakers, you're essentially training your mouth and brain to work together seamlessly. You're absorbing the natural flow and patterns of English speech, which can have a profound impact on your own speaking.
Okay, I can see how that would be really helpful. Are there any specific tips for making shadowing more effective?
Yes, definitely. First, choose recordings that are clear and easy to understand. It's also helpful to start with shorter segments and gradually increase the length as you improve. And remember, don't worry about being perfect. The goal is to get comfortable with the rhythm and flow of English.
Got it. So no pressure to sound like a native speaker right away. Just focus on mimicking the sounds and rhythm.
Exactly. Just have fun with it and allow yourself to experiment.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Now, you mentioned earlier that it's important to resist the urge to self-correct. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. We all do it. We're in the middle of a sentence, we realize we've made a mistake, and we try to go back and fix it. While it's important to be aware of our mistakes, overcorrecting can actually disrupt the flow of our speech and slow us down.
You're telling me I'm the king of self-correction.
I think we're all guilty of it to some extent. But remember, our primary goal here is fluency, not perfection. It's better to keep talking, even if you make a small mistake, than to get stuck in a loop of trying to fix it.
Okay, that's a tough habit to break, but I'm willing to give it a try. What else can we do to prevent those mid-sentence stalls?
Another helpful tactic is to replace difficult words with simpler synonyms.
So if I can't think of the word exquisite, I could just say beautiful.
Exactly. It's about finding alternative ways to express yourself without getting bogged down in complex vocabulary. Remember, clarity is key.
And how do I train myself to think of those simpler words on the spot?
It's all about expanding your vocabulary in context. When you're reading or listening to English, pay attention to how words are used and try to identify synonyms for words you don't know or struggle with.
So it's like building a mental thesaurus, a collection of words at my fingertips.
Precisely. The more words you know, the easier it will be to find alternatives when you need them.
That's great advice, Lily. We've covered a lot of ground here, from physical warm-ups to mental exercises and even the power of visualization. But let's get practical now. What are some specific things our listeners can do to start implementing these techniques?
Well, one simple but effective strategy is to learn sentence starters.
Sentence starters. You mean like phrases that can help us kickstart our thoughts?
Exactly. These are phrases like, I think that the reason is, what I mean is, and so on. They can help you overcome that initial hurdle of getting started.
Okay, so instead of staring blankly, trying to come up with the perfect opening line, we can use one of these starters to get the ball rolling.
Precisely. It's like having a set of trusty tools to help you build your sentences.
And how do we go about learning these sentence starters?
There are tons of resources available online and in textbooks, but the best way is to simply pay attention to how native speakers use them in conversations. You'll start to notice patterns and can even create a list of your favorites to practice with.
I love making lists. It's a great way to stay organized. What else can we do to practice fluency?
Another great technique is to use a timer. Set it for 30 seconds or a minute, and challenge yourself to speak without stopping until the timer goes off.
So it's like a fluency sprint.
Exactly. It's a fun and challenging way to push yourself outside of your comfort zone and get used to speaking continuously.
And what should we talk about during these time challenges?
Yeah.
Any topic goes.
It can be anything you like. It could be a topic you're passionate about, a story you've read, or even just a description of your day. The important thing is to keep those words flowing.
Got it. Just let the words flow and don't overthink it.
Exactly. And here's a bonus tip. Studies show that speaking louder can actually reduce hesitation.
Really? Why is that?
Well, when you speak louder, you project more confidence. And when you feel confident, you're less likely to second-guess yourself or to worry about making mistakes.
So it's like faking it until you make it, using our voices to boost our confidence.
In a way, yes. It's about harnessing the power of your voice.
I love that. Speak loud and proud. Okay, we've talked about sentence starters and time challenges. What other fun and engaging ways can we practice fluency?
One that I really enjoy is acting like a news reporter.
Okay, I can totally see you doing that. You've got the voice for it.
Well, thank you, Mike. But seriously, reading news aloud like a reporter is a fantastic way to practice clear and fast speech.
And how do we do that exactly? Any tips for channeling our inner news anchor?
Simply choose a news article or a story that interests you and read it aloud as if you're presenting it to an audience.
So I should pretend I'm on TV delivering the breaking news.
Exactly. Focus on enunciating, clearly speaking at a good pace, and maintaining a steady flow.
And should I try to imitate the reporters I see on TV?
It can be helpful to observe their style and delivery, but ultimately you want to develop your own unique voice.
Okay, that's a fun one. What else can we do to make our speech sound more natural and fluent?
Well, don't be afraid to use filler sounds.
Filler sounds, you mean like and
Well, those are definitely filler sounds, but I'm talking about sounds like and right.
I thought those were considered bad speaking habits.
Not at all. They're actually a natural part of spoken language, and when used effectively, they can help keep conversations flowing smoothly.
Really? How so?
Well, they signal to the other person that you're listening and engaged, and they can also give you a moment to gather your thoughts without creating an awkward silence.
So it's like a subtle way to keep the conversation moving forward.
Exactly. And they can also make you sound more relaxed and approachable.
Okay, I'm starting to see the value in those little filler sounds. What other fun activities can we try to boost our fluency?
Well, there are lots of speaking games and activities out there. One that I really enjoy is Just a Minute.
Just a minute. How do you play that? It sounds intriguing.
It's a simple game where you choose a topic and try to speak about it for 1 minute without pausing, hesitating, or repeating yourself.
It sounds challenging, but also like a lot of fun.
It is. It's a great way to improve your fluency and your ability to think on your feet.
I can imagine it getting quite competitive, too.
It definitely can. But remember, the main goal is to have fun and to challenge yourself to speak more fluently.
And what if I don't have anyone to play with? Can I still enjoy the challenge?
Absolutely. You can play just a minute by yourself. Just set a timer and challenge yourself to speak about a random topic for a minute.
That's a great idea. I love that I can practice this anytime, anywhere. What other activities can we try?
Another fun and simple activity is to describe everyday objects out loud.
So, like, I could pick up my coffee mug and start describing it in detail.
Exactly. Try to be as detailed as possible. Talk about its shape, its color, its texture, how it feels in your hand, anything that comes to mind.
And how does this seemingly simple activity help with fluency?
Well, it forces you to think on your feet and to come up with words quickly. And it also helps you to develop your descriptive vocabulary, which is so valuable for communication.
That's a great tip, Lily. I'm going to start describing everything I see.
I encourage you to, Mike. You'll be surprised at how much it can improve your fluency.
Okay, Lily, we've covered an impressive amount of ground today, from physical exercises and mental strategies to fun games and activities. But before we wrap up this part of our conversation, I want to touch on one more important point: the importance of thinking in English.
That's a great point, Mike. One of the biggest obstacles to fluency is the habit of translating from our native language.
I'm so guilty of that. It's a hard habit to break.
It's a common trap, but when we translate, we're essentially adding an extra step to the speaking process, which can lead to hesitation and pauses.
So how do we break free from this habit and start thinking in English more naturally?
It takes time and dedicated practice, but one helpful tip is to immerse yourself in English as much as possible. Surround yourself with English books, movies, music, and conversations.
So it's all about creating an English-speaking environment for ourselves, even if we're not physically in an English-speaking country.
Exactly. The more you expose yourself to English, the more natural it will become to think in English.
And what about when we're not actively listening or reading in English? What can we do during those times?
Try to incorporate English into your daily thoughts and activities. For example, when you're walking down the street, try to describe what you see in English. Or when you're cooking dinner, think about the recipe in English.
So it's about making English an integral part of our everyday lives.
Precisely. The more you think in English, the easier it will become to speak in English fluently.
That's fantastic advice, Lily. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about and a lot to practice today. But we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, so make sure to join us for part 2 of this episode, where we'll dive into even more techniques and strategies for unlocking your fluency potential.
Absolutely, Mike. We'll be back with more tips and tricks to help you speak English with confidence and ease.
Until then, keep practicing, and remember, fluency is a journey, not a destination. Embrace the process, have fun with it, and celebrate your progress along the way.
We'll see you in part 2. Welcome back to English Podcast Flow, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us for part 2 of our episode on speaking without pausing.
We covered a lot of ground in the first part, from physical exercises to mental strategies, and even the power of visualization.
It's amazing how much our bodies and minds work together to help us communicate effectively.
Absolutely, Lily. And speaking of mental strategies, we touched on the importance of thinking in English. But I think it's worth diving a little deeper into this topic.
I agree, Mike. It's one of those things that sounds simple in theory, but can be surprisingly challenging in practice.
It's so easy to fall into the trap of translating from our native language, especially when we're feeling under pressure.
It's a natural instinct, but the problem is that translating slows us down and introduces those pesky pauses and hesitations.
So how do we break free from this habit and start thinking in English more naturally?
Well, it starts with creating an immersive English environment for yourself. Surround yourself with English as much as possible, whether it's through books, movies, music, podcasts, or even social media.
So it's about making English a part of our daily lives,
No.
not just something we study in a classroom.
Exactly, Mike. And it's also about training our brains to think in English, rather than relying on our native language as a crutch.
That makes sense. But how do we actually do that? How do we rewire our brains to think in a different language?
One effective technique is to start small. Start by thinking in English for short periods of time, maybe just a few minutes each day.
So it's like a mental workout. We gradually increase the intensity over time.
Exactly, and as you become more comfortable, you can extend those periods of English thinking.
And what about those times when we get stuck, when we can't find the right word in English?
Don't be afraid to use a dictionary or a thesaurus. It's okay to look up words you don't know.
It's all part of the learning process, right?
Absolutely, Mike. And the more you expose yourself to English vocabulary, the easier it will become to think in English naturally.
Okay, so we're working on thinking in English. Now let's talk about another important aspect of fluency: pronunciation.
Pronunciation is crucial for clear communication. If people can't understand what you're saying, it doesn't matter how fluent you are.
That's so true, Lily.
Yeah.
So how can we improve our pronunciation?
One of the best ways is to listen attentively to native speakers. Pay attention to how they pronounce words and try to imitate their sounds.
So it's like being a pronunciation detective. We're listening for clues and patterns.
Exactly, Mike. And there are plenty of resources available to help you with this. There are pronunciation guides online, language learning apps, and even YouTube videos.
It's amazing how much information is at our fingertips these days.
It really is, Mike. And another helpful tip is to record yourself speaking. Listen back to your recordings and identify areas where you need to improve.
It can be a little cringeworthy to listen to our own voices,
Yeah.
but it's a valuable exercise.
It really is, Mike. And the more you practice, the better your pronunciation will become.
Okay, so we've talked about thinking in English and improving our pronunciation. Now let's shift gears and talk about a common fluency killer: nervousness.
Nervousness is a natural human response, But when it comes to speaking, it can really throw us off our game.
It's like that feeling you get before a big presentation. Your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, and your mind goes blank.
We've all been there, Mike. It's perfectly normal. But the good news is that there are ways to manage those nerves.
Tell us more, Lily. What are your secrets for staying calm and collected when speaking English?
Well, one helpful tip is to practice beforehand. The more familiar you are with the topic you're speaking about, the less nervous you'll feel.
So it's all about preparation.
Exactly, Mike. And it's also about building confidence. The more you practice speaking English, the more confident you'll become.
That makes sense. And what about those last-minute jitters right before we start speaking?
There are a few things you can do to calm those nerves. Take a few deep breaths, focus on your breathing, and try to relax your body.
It sounds like we're talking about mindfulness techniques.
In a way, yes. Mindfulness can be very helpful for managing anxiety.
And what about those times when we make a mistake? Do you have any advice for bouncing back from those moments?
Don't beat yourself up over mistakes. Everyone makes them. It's part of the learning process.
So it's all about embracing those imperfections.
Exactly, Mike. And remember that most people are more focused on the content of what you're saying than on your grammar or pronunciation.
So the key is to keep talking even if we make a slip-up.
Absolutely, Mike. And the more you practice, the less those mistakes will bother you.
Okay, so we've talked about managing nervousness. Now let's move on to another important aspect of fluency. Vocabulary.
Vocabulary is the foundation of language. Without a solid vocabulary, it's difficult to express ourselves clearly and effectively.
So how can we expand our English vocabulary?
One of the best ways is to read widely. Read books, magazines, articles, websites, anything that interests you.
And as we're reading, we should pay attention to new words and try to understand their meanings.
Exactly, Mike. And don't be afraid to look up words you don't know. You can use a dictionary, a thesaurus, or even as online translator.
It's amazing how many tools are available to help us learn new words.
It really is, Mike. And another helpful tip is to use flashcards. Write the word on one side and the definition on the other.
Flashcards are a classic study technique, but they're effective for a reason.
Absolutely, Mike. And you can also use flashcards to create your own personal vocabulary list.
So we're building our own custom dictionaries.
Exactly, Mike. And the more you practice with these flashcards, the more those words will become ingrained in your memory.
Okay, so we're reading widely and using flashcards.
Yeah.
What else can we do to boost our vocabulary?
Another fun and effective technique is to play word games. There are tons of word games available online and in app stores.
Word games are a great way to learn new words and have fun at the same time.
Absolutely, Mike. And they also challenge our brains to think creatively and to make connections between words.
So like a mental workout for our vocabulary.
Exactly, Mike. And the more we play these games, the stronger our vocabulary muscles will become.
Okay, we've talked about expanding our vocabulary. Now let's talk about a technique that can help us put those words into practice. Shadowing.
Shadowing is a powerful technique for improving fluency, pronunciation, and even intonation.
It sounds a little mysterious, Lily. Can you explain what it entails?
Of course, Mike. Shadowing involves listening to a recording of a native speaker and repeating what they say as closely as possible.
So it's like mimicking their every word and sound.
Exactly, Mike. And the key is to do this simultaneously. Listen and repeat at the same time.
It sounds challenging, but I can see how it would be beneficial.
It really is, Mike. It forces you to pay attention to the nuances of pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation.
So it's like a full-body workout for our spoken English.
Precisely, Mike. And the more you practice shadowing, the more natural and fluent your speech will become.
Okay, so we've covered shadowing. Now let's talk about another important aspect of communication. Body language.
Body language plays a crucial role in how we communicate. Our words convey one message, but our body language can convey a completely different one.
It's true, Lily. We've all had those experiences where someone's words say one thing, but their body language screams something else.
Exactly, Mike. And when it comes to speaking English confidently, body language is essential.
So how can we use body language to our advantage?
One important tip is to make eye contact with your listener. It shows that you're engaged and interested in what they have to say.
Eye contact can be powerful. It creates a sense of connection.
Absolutely, Mike. And it also helps to convey confidence. When you make eye contact, you're showing that you're not afraid to be seen and heard.
That makes sense. And what about our posture? Should we be standing up straight or sitting up tall?
Good posture is essential for projecting confidence. When you stand or sit up straight, you appear more self-assured and in control.
It's like we're physically embodying confidence.
Exactly, Mike. And good posture also helps to improve your breathing, which can have a positive impact on your voice quality.
So we're hitting two birds with one stone.
Absolutely, Mike. And speaking of voice quality, let's talk about how we can use our voices to communicate more effectively.
Our voices are powerful instruments. They can convey a wide range of emotions and ideas.
That's so true, Mike. And when it comes to speaking English fluently, it's important to use our voices to our advantage.
So what are some tips for using our voices more effectively?
One important tip is to vary your pitch and tone. If you speak in a monotone voice, you'll sound bored and disengaged.
So we need to add some vocal variety to keep our listeners interested,
Exactly, Mike. And you can also use your voice to emphasize certain words or phrases.
like adding bold or italics to our spoken language.
Precisely, Mike. And another helpful tip is to speak clearly and enunciate your words properly.
So we're making sure that every sound is crisp and distinct.
Exactly, Mike. And this is especially important when speaking to people who may not be familiar with your accent.
Okay, so we're varying our pitch and tone, emphasizing key words, and speaking clearly. What else can we do to enhance our vocal delivery?
Another helpful tip is to record yourself speaking. Listen back to your recordings and pay attention to your voice quality.
This is becoming a recurring theme. It seems like recording ourselves is a valuable tool for self-improvement.
It really is, Mike. And by listening to our own voices, we can identify areas where we need to improve.
Okay, we've talked about body language and voice quality. Now let's move on to another important aspect of fluency. Grammar.
Grammar is the backbone of language. It provides the structure and rules that allow us to communicate effectively.
But grammar can also be a source of frustration for English learners. It can feel like there are so many rules to remember.
It's true, Mike. English grammar can be complex. But the good news is that you don't need to be a grammar expert to speak fluently.
So it's more about understanding the basic principles rather than memorizing every single rule.
Exactly, Mike. And the best way to improve your grammar is to practice regularly.
Practice makes perfect, as they say.
Absolutely, Mike. And there are plenty of resources available to help you with this. There are grammar books, websites, apps, and even online courses.
It's amazing how accessible grammar learning has become.
It really is, Mike. And another helpful tip is to focus on one grammar point at a time.
So we're breaking down the complex into manageable chunks.
Exactly, Mike. And once you feel comfortable with one grammar point, you can move on to the next.
It's like building a house brick by brick.
Precisely, Mike. And the more you practice, the stronger your grammar foundation will become.
Okay, we've covered grammar. Now let's talk about another essential aspect of fluent speech. Confidence.
Confidence is key when it comes to speaking any language. If you believe in yourself, others will believe in you too.
But confidence can be elusive, especially when we're speaking a language that's not our native tongue.
It's understandable, Mike. But the good news is that confidence can be built over time.
So how do we go about building our confidence in English?
Well, it starts with positive self-talk. Instead of focusing on your mistakes, focus on your progress.
So we're changing our inner dialogue from negative to positive.
Exactly, Mike. And it's also about setting realistic goals. Don't expect to become fluent overnight. It takes time and effort.
So we're taking baby steps and celebrating every milestone.
Absolutely, Mike. And another helpful tip is to surround yourself with supportive people, people who encourage and motivate you.
It's so important to have a cheer squad in our corner.
It really is, Mike.
Yeah.
And remember that mistakes are part of the learning process. Don't let them derail you.
So we're embracing those stumbles as opportunities for growth.
Exactly, Mike. And the more you practice and the more confident you become, the more fluent you'll sound.
Okay, so we've talked about confidence. Now let's move on to another important aspect of communication. Listening.
Listening is just as important as speaking. When we listen actively, we're not just hearing the words, but we're also understanding the meaning and the intent behind them.
So it's about being fully present in the conversation.
Exactly, Mike. And active listening involves paying attention to both verbal and nonverbal cues.
So we're not just listening to the words, but we're also observing body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice.
Precisely, Mike. And active listening also involves asking clarifying questions to make sure we understand what the speaker is saying.
So it's a two-way street. We're not just passive recipients of information,
Yeah.
but we're actively engaging with the speaker.
Absolutely, Mike. And when we listen actively, we build rapport and create a more meaningful connection with the other person.
So it's not just about understanding the words, but it's also about understanding the person behind those words.
Exactly, Mike. And active listening is a skill that can be developed with practice.
Okay, so we've talked about listening. Now let's move on to another technique that can help us improve our fluency. Repetition.
Repetition is a powerful tool for learning. When we repeat something over and over again, it becomes ingrained in our memory.
So it's like drilling those words and phrases into our brains.
Exactly, Mike. And repetition can be used to improve our pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and even fluency.
So how can we incorporate repetition into our English practice?
One simple technique is to listen to a recording of a native speaker and repeat what they say.
This sounds familiar. It's similar to shadowing.
It is similar, Mike. But with repetition, we're not necessarily trying to mimic the speaker exactly.
So it's more about getting comfortable with the sounds and the rhythm of the language?
Exactly, Mike. And another helpful technique is to record yourself speaking. Listen back to your recordings and repeat any sentences or phrases that you struggled with.
So we're identifying our weak spots and working on them specifically.
Precisely, Mike. And the more you repeat these challenging phrases, the easier they will become to say.
Okay, so we've talked about repetition. Now let's move on to another important aspect of fluency. Speed.
Speaking speed can be a tricky thing. If you speak too fast, people may not understand you. But if you speak too slowly, you may sound hesitant or uncertain.
So it's all about finding the right balance.
Exactly, Mike. And the ideal speaking speed varies depending on the situation, the audience, and the speaker's personal style.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely, Mike. But in general, it's best to aim for a speed that is comfortable for both you and your listener.
So we're listening to our own internal cues
Yeah,
and also paying attention to the feedback we're getting from the other person.
precisely, Mike. And if you're not sure whether you're speaking too fast or too slow, you can always ask a friend or a language partner for feedback.
It's always helpful to get an outside perspective.
Absolutely, Mike. And the more you practice speaking English, the more comfortable you'll become with finding the right speaking speed for you.
Okay, we've covered speed. Now let's talk about another common fluency challenge. Idioms.
Idioms are those colorful expressions that add richness and nuance to language. But they can also be confusing for English learners because their meanings are not always literal.
It's true, Lily. Idioms can be like little puzzles. We have to decipher their hidden meanings.
Exactly, Mike. And the best way to learn idioms is to expose yourself to them in context.
So we're not just memorizing lists of idioms, but we're seeing how they're used in real-life situations.
Precisely, Mike. And you can find idioms everywhere. In books, movies, TV shows, songs, and even everyday conversations.
So it's about being attuned to the nuances of language.
Absolutely, Mike. And another helpful tip is to keep a notebook or a digital document where you can record new idioms that you come across.
So we're creating our own personal idiom dictionary.
Exactly, Mike. And the more idioms you learn, the more fluent and expressive your English will become.
Okay, we've covered idioms. Now let's move on to another technique that can help us improve our fluency. Paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing is the ability to express the same idea in different words. It's a valuable skill for communication because it allows us to avoid repetition and to clarify our meaning.
So it's like having multiple tools in our communication toolbox.
Exactly, Mike. And paraphrasing is especially useful when we can't think of the exact word or phrase we need.
So it's a way of circumventing those mental roadblocks.
Precisely, Mike. And the best way to improve our paraphrasing skills is to practice regularly.
Practice makes perfect, as they say.
Absolutely, Mike. And one way to practice paraphrasing is to take a sentence or a paragraph and try to express it in a different way.
So we're essentially rewriting the text in our own words.
Exactly, Mike. And you can also practice paraphrasing by summarizing articles or stories.
So we're condensing the main ideas into a shorter, more concise format.
Precisely, Mike. And the more you practice paraphrasing, the more flexible and adaptable your language will become.
Okay, so we've covered paraphrasing. Now let's talk about another important aspect of fluency. Feedback.
Feedback is essential for growth. When we receive feedback, we can identify areas where we need to improve.
But feedback can be scary, especially when it's negative.
It's true, Mike. But it's important to remember that feedback is not a personal attack. It's simply an opportunity to learn and grow.
So we're reframing feedback as a gift rather than a criticism.
Exactly, Mike. And when we receive feedback, it's important to listen attentively and to ask clarifying questions if needed.
So we're making sure that we understand the feedback and that we can use it to improve.
Precisely, Mike. And it's also important to thank the person who gave you the feedback, even if it wasn't what you wanted to hear.
So we're showing gratitude for their time and effort.
Absolutely, Mike. And remember that feedback is a valuable tool for improving our fluency.
Okay, we've covered feedback. Now let's move on to another important aspect of communication. Storytelling.
Storytelling is a powerful way to connect with others. When we tell a story, we're not just sharing information, but we're also sharing our emotions and experiences.
Stories have a way of captivating our attention and drawing us in.
That's so true, Mike. And when we tell stories in English, we're not just practicing our language skills, but we're also building rapport and creating memorable experiences.
So how can we become better storytellers?
One important tip is to choose stories that are meaningful to us, stories that we're passionate about.
So we're tapping into our own personal wellspring of inspiration.
Exactly, Mike. And when we tell stories that we care about, our enthusiasm will shine through.
And that enthusiasm will be contagious. It will engage our listeners.
Absolutely, Mike. And another helpful tip is to structure our stories effectively.
So we're creating a narrative arc with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Precisely, Mike. And we can also use storytelling techniques like suspense, humor, and imagery to make our stories more engaging.
So we're turning our stories into mini masterpieces.
Exactly, Mike. And the more we practice storytelling, the more confident and fluent we'll become.
Okay, we've covered storytelling. Now let's move on to another important aspect of communication. Humor.
Humor is a powerful tool for connection. When we make people laugh, we break down barriers and create a sense of camaraderie.
Laughter is truly the best medicine.
It really is, Mike. And when we use humor in our English conversations, we not only make ourselves more likable, but we also improve our fluency.
How so?
Well, humor requires us to think quickly and creatively. It forces us to come up with witty responses on the spot.
So it's like a mental agility workout.
Exactly, Mike.
Yeah.
And humor also helps us to relax and to let go of our inhibitions.
So we're not taking ourselves too seriously.
Absolutely, Mike. And when we're relaxed and having fun, our fluency naturally improves.
Okay, so how can we incorporate more humor into our English conversations?
One tip is to pay attention to the humor around you. Watch stand-up comedians, listen to funny podcasts, and read humorous books.
So we're immersing ourselves in the world of humor.
Exactly, Mike. And another tip is to practice telling jokes. Even if they're corny or cheesy, telling jokes can help us to develop our comedic timing and delivery.
So we're honing our stand-up skills.
Precisely, Mike. And remember that humor is subjective. What one person finds funny, another person may not.
So it's about finding our own comedic voice.
Exactly, Mike. And the more we practice, the more comfortable and confident we'll become with using humor in English.
Okay, we've covered humor. Now let's move on to our final topic for part 2 of this episode. Fluency goals.
Setting goals is essential for progress. When we have clear goals in mind, we're more likely to achieve them.
So we're giving ourselves a roadmap to fluency.
Exactly, Mike. And when setting fluency goals, it's important to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Those are the SMART goals we've all heard about.
Absolutely, Mike. And for example, instead of setting a vague goal like, I want to improve my fluency, set a specific goal like, I want to be able to hold a 5-minute conversation with a native speaker without pausing or hesitating.
So we're giving ourselves a tangible target to aim for.
Precisely, Mike. And it's also important to break down large goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
So we're creating a series of mini goals that lead us to our ultimate destination.
Exactly, Mike. And as you achieve each mini goal, celebrate your success. This will help you to stay motivated and on track.
So we're acknowledging our progress and giving ourselves a pat on the back.
Absolutely, Mike. And remember that fluency is a journey, not a destination. Enjoy the process and don't be too hard on yourself.
Well said, Lily. I think that's a great note to end part 2 of our episode on speaking without pausing.
I agree, Mike. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still more to come.
Make sure to join us for part 3, where we'll delve into even more techniques and strategies for unlocking your fluency potential.
We'll see you then.
Welcome back to English Podcast Flow, everyone. We're so happy you could join us for part 3 of our conversation about speaking without pausing.
It's been quite a journey so far, wouldn't you say? We've uncovered so many techniques and strategies to really help boost fluency.
Absolutely, Lily. I mean, we've talked about everything from those physical warm-ups to, mental exercises and even things like confidence boosters and the power of storytelling. It's really amazing.
It really is amazing, Mike, when you think about it. All these different things that come together to help us speak English fluently and confidently.
It really is like a huge project.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of effort. But before we wrap up this episode, I want to go back to one of the themes, one of the main points we've been talking about, throughout this whole conversation.
I'm curious, what theme is that, Mike?
Well, it's practice, right? We've mentioned it over and over, but I think it's so important that we really, really emphasize it one more time.
I agree with you completely, Mike. Practice really is the key to fluency. Is what connects, the things we know to actually being able to communicate well.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like it's like any skill, really. Like when you're learning to play a musical instrument or when you're playing a sport or you're trying to learn a new language, you need to practice to turn what you know into, actual ability.
That's a great way to put it, Mike. And when we're talking about speaking without those pauses, consistent practice is just so important. It helps us build up those automatic responses and really overcome those moments where we hesitate.
Right? Like you're building up a muscle almost. The more you practice, the easier it becomes.
Exactly, Mike. And the best thing about practicing is that it doesn't have to be boring, right? It doesn't have to feel like a chore.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about so many fun ways to practice things like shadowing, like playing word games, like talking with language partners, all kinds of things.
Yeah, you just have to find something that's actually enjoyable and something you look forward to doing.
Right, because if you enjoy it, you're much more likely to stick with it. And that's the key, right? Sticking with it.
Absolutely. So, for anyone listening, if you're feeling a little bit discouraged or maybe a bit overwhelmed, remember that fluency isn't something you achieve overnight. It's something you build over time.
It really is a journey.
Mhm.
And every step you take gets you a little closer to where you want to be.
That's a great way to look at it, Mike. Every step is progress. And speaking of progress, we talked about setting those SMART goals in the last part, but maybe we should touch on that again.
I think that's a good idea, Lily. It's so important to set specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals because it really helps us stay on track.
Right. It's like having a map to guide you. And when you set these SMART goals, you're not just saying, I want to be fluent, but you're actually focusing on specific things you want to improve, right?
Like, for example, you might set a goal to learn more vocabulary or to improve your pronunciation, or maybe to practice speaking without pausing for a certain length of time.
Exactly. And by breaking down those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps, it feels a lot less overwhelming and it feels like something you can actually achieve.
Yeah, it's like climbing a mountain. You take it one step at a time.
Exactly. And as you reach each of those smaller goals, you celebrate those successes.
Right.
You give yourself credit, and that keeps you motivated to keep going.
Absolutely. It's all about recognizing that progress, however small it may seem.
Exactly. And before you know it, you've reached the top of that mountain.
And the view from up there is amazing.
Oh, it is. It's so rewarding to see how far you've come.
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes all that effort worthwhile.
And the great thing is, Mike, even when you reach that peak, the journey doesn't have to end there.
Right. I mean, fluency isn't a destination, really. It's something you keep working on, something you keep improving.
Exactly. It's a journey that never really ends, and that's what makes it so exciting, right?
I think that's a great way to look at it, Lily. And if you're someone who often finds themselves stopping or hesitating while speaking English, you're definitely in the right place because we're going to explore a bunch of techniques and strategies to help you speak more smoothly and naturally.
That's right, Mike. We're going to dive into 18 different tips and tricks that can help you unlock your fluency and express yourself with more confidence and ease. It appears that for many English learners, those pesky pauses can be a real roadblock to feeling truly comfortable and natural when speaking. So we're here to provide you with a whole toolbox of techniques to help you break through those barriers and find your flow.
I love it. A fluency toolbox. It's a great way to think about it because it's not about finding one magic solution that works for everyone. It's about experimenting and finding the right combination of tools that work best for you. And before we jump into the specific techniques, I think it would be helpful to talk a bit about why those pauses happen in the first place. What's going on in our minds when we suddenly find ourselves stuck for words?
That's a great point, Mike. Understanding the reasons behind those pauses can help us address them more effectively. It appears that sometimes it's simply a matter of not knowing the right word or needing a moment to recall it from our mental vocabulary. Other times we might be mentally translating from our native language, which can slow us down, and of course a lack of confidence or fear of making mistakes can also contribute to those hesitations. It's like our brains hit the pause button while we try to figure things out.
It's almost like a mental traffic jam, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got all these thoughts and ideas trying to get out, but they're all stuck behind a red light, waiting for the signal to move forward. So how do we clear up those mental roadblocks and get our words flowing smoothly?
Well, one powerful technique that's often recommended is to start thinking in English. Now, I know this might sound a bit daunting at first, especially if you're used to thinking in your native language, but it's all about training your brain to process information directly in English rather than going through that extra step of translation.
So instead of thinking, I want to go to the store in your native language and then trying to translate it into English, you would directly think, I want to go to the store in English.
Exactly. It's about shifting your mental gears and creating those neural pathways for English. Thought it might feel a bit awkward at first, like you're using a muscle you haven't used in a while, but the more you practice, the easier it becomes. And a great way to start is by talking to yourself in English throughout the day.
That's a great tip. And it's something you can do anywhere, anytime you can narrate your daily activities, describe what you're seeing, think through problems in English. It's like giving your brain an English workout.
Absolutely. And the more you immerse yourself in the language, the more natural it will feel to think in English. Now, another technique that can help with fluency is called shadowing. Have you ever heard of this, Mike?
I have. It's a technique where you listen to a native English speaker and try to repeat what they're saying simultaneously, almost like you're their shadow. It's like a vocal workout that helps you match the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of natural English speech.
That's a great explanation, Mike. It's like you're trying to synchronize your voice with the speaker's voice, paying attention not just to the words, but also to the pauses, the emphasis, and the overall flow.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic way to train your ear and your mouth to work together seamlessly.
And the great thing about shadowing is that you can do it with a variety of resources.
Yeah.
You can use podcasts like this one, audiobooks, YouTube videos, movies, anything where you can clearly hear a native English speaker.
Exactly. And it's a technique that can be adapted to different levels. If you're a beginner, you can start with slower, clearer recordings and gradually work your way up to faster, more complex material. And even if you don't understand every word, you're still absorbing the sounds, the patterns, the music of the language.
It's like learning to dance. You don't start by trying to perform a complicated routine. You start by practicing the basic steps, getting a feel for the rhythm, and gradually building up your skills.
That's a wonderful analogy, Mike. And as you become more comfortable with shadowing, you can even challenge yourself by trying to anticipate what the speaker's going to say next. It's like a mental game that keeps your brain engaged and active.
So we've talked about thinking in English and shadowing, both of which are fantastic ways to train your brain for fluency. But what about actually practicing speaking itself? It appears that sometimes we need to push ourselves beyond those mental exercises and actually get our mouths moving.
You're absolutely right, Mike. And there's a great exercise called the one breath exercise that can help with this. It's all about building up your speaking stamina and training yourself to speak in longer phrases without pausing.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does the one breath exercise work?
It's quite simple, actually. You choose a sentence or a phrase and you try to say it all in one breath without stopping. It's like a mini marathon for your lungs and your vocal cords.
Oh, it's not about speaking quickly. It's about maintaining a smooth and steady flow of words without those interruptions.
Exactly. You want to find that sweet spot where you're speaking at a natural pace, but without those unnecessary pauses. And the key is to start with shorter sentences and gradually increase the length and complexity as you get more comfortable.
So you might start with something simple like, my name is Mike, and then move on to, I enjoy listening to podcasts, and eventually build up to longer, more elaborate sentences.
That's right. It's all about gradually pushing your boundaries and expanding your speaking capacity. And the great thing about the one breath exercise is that you can do it anywhere, anytime. You can practice while you're walking, cooking, showering, even waiting in line at the grocery store.
It's like a secret weapon for fluency training. You can sneak it into your daily routine without anyone even knowing.
And it's not just about building stamina, it's also about developing that sense of rhythm and flow in your speech. It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You start with simple scales and exercises and gradually build up to more complex melodies.
I love that analogy because it highlights the importance of practice and repetition. It's not about getting it perfect the first time, it's about gradually honing your skills and developing that natural fluency.
Exactly. And speaking of practice, another great way to improve your speaking without pausing is to focus on sentence patterns.
Sentence patterns, can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. It appears that memorizing common sentence structures can be a real game changer when it comes to fluency because it gives you a framework to build upon. It's like having a mental blueprint for creating sentences without having to think about every single word from scratch.
So instead of struggling to find the right words and grammar, you have these pre-built structures that you can easily adapt and personalize.
Precisely. For example, if you learn the pattern, I like to shit, you can easily plug in different verbs and create a variety of sentences like, I like to read, I like to travel, I like to learn new things. It's a simple yet powerful technique that can significantly reduce those moments where you're searching for words and help you speak more spontaneously.
That's a great tip, and it reminds me of something I used to do when I was learning Spanish. I would write down common sentence patterns and practice using them in different contexts. It's like building a mental library of ready-made phrases that you can access whenever you need them.
Exactly. And the more you practice using these patterns, the more ingrained they become in your memory and the easier it becomes to speak fluently without those pauses. But what happens when you do hit a snag and you completely forget a word? Should you just freeze up and give up?
That's a great question because it happens to all of us. Even native English speakers sometimes have those moments where a word escapes them.
Hmm.
So what do you recommend in those situations?
Well, the most important thing is to keep your mouth moving. Don't let that one missing word derail your entire train of thought. It appears that one strategy is to simply use a simpler word or phrase that conveys a similar meaning.
So for example, if you can't remember the word delicious, you could say very tasty or really good.
Exactly. Your listener will still understand what you mean, and you won't break the flow of your speech. And another trick you can use is to try describing the word you can't remember.
So if you can't remember the word umbrella, you could say it's the thing you use to protect yourself from the rain.
That's right. It's like creating a little mental detour to keep your speech moving forward. And sometimes the act of describing the word can even help you remember it.
It's like giving your brain a little nudge in the right direction. And it also shows your listener that you're actively trying to communicate, even if you're facing a temporary vocabulary gap.
Exactly. It demonstrates your resourcefulness and your commitment to keeping the conversation going. But even with all these techniques, it's natural to wonder, how do we know if we're actually making progress? How do we measure our fluency and see those improvements over time?
That's a great question. And it brings us to another important tool in our fluency toolbox, recording ourselves speaking. Now, I know this might sound a bit intimidating at first, but trust me, it's one of the most effective ways to identify those areas where you tend to pause and track your progress over time.
It's like having a personal speech coach in your pocket. You can listen back to your recordings and pinpoint those moments where you hesitate, stumble over words, or lose your train of thought. And once you've identified those areas, you can focus on specific techniques to address them.
So it's not just about blindly practicing. It's about practicing with intention and using those recordings as a feedback loop to guide your improvement.
Precisely. It's about becoming more aware of your own speech patterns and using that awareness to refine your skills. And you don't need any fancy equipment to do this. Your smartphone or computer likely has a built-in voice recorder that you can use.
So how do you recommend using these recordings for practice?
It appears that a great way to start is to choose a familiar topic, something you're comfortable talking about, like your hobbies, your family, your daily routine, and set a timer for a minute or two. Then simply speak freely on that topic as if you were having a conversation with a friend.
And then listen back to the recording and see how you did.
Exactly. Pay attention to those moments where you paused, hesitated, or stumbled over words, and don't be too critical of yourself. Remember, this is a learning process, and every mistake is an opportunity for growth.
So it's not about beating ourselves up for those imperfections. It's about using them as stepping stones to fluency.
Exactly. And the more you practice recording yourself and listening back, the more comfortable you'll become with the sound of your own voice, and the more confident you'll feel speaking English.
And speaking of confidence, another great way to improve your fluency is by reading aloud.
Reading aloud, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
How does that help with speaking without pausing?
Well, it appears that reading aloud has several benefits. Firstly, it forces you to pronounce words clearly and correctly. It's like a workout for your tongue and your vocal cords.
That makes sense. It's like practicing those individual movements before you try to perform the whole dance routine.
Exactly. And secondly, it helps you get comfortable with the rhythm and intonation of English speech. It's like training your inner voice to speak more fluently.
So it's not just about reading the words on the page, it's about bringing them to life with your voice.
Precisely. And the great thing about reading aloud is that you can do it with anything. Books, articles, websites, even subtitles on movies.
And you can even add a little bit of drama and flair to it, like you're an actor performing on stage.
Absolutely. It's all about making it fun and engaging. And the more you practice, the more natural and confident your speaking will become.
So we've talked about a lot of different techniques so far. Thinking in English, shadowing the one breath exercise, sentence patterns, using simpler words, keeping your mouth moving, recording yourself, and reading aloud. It's an impressive toolbox of fluency boosting strategies. But I'm curious, Mike, what are some of your personal favorite techniques or tips that you found helpful in your own language learning journey?
That's a great question, and one that I've been thinking about as we've been discussing all these amazing techniques. For me, one of the most important things has been to embrace the fear of making mistakes. It sounds counterintuitive, I know. But I've realized that the more I allow myself to make mistakes, the faster I learn and improve.
That's a powerful insight, Mike. It appears that so often we let the fear of judgment or embarrassment hold us back from truly expressing ourselves. But the truth is, everyone makes mistakes, especially when learning a new language. It's part of the process.
Exactly. And I've found that when I shift my focus from perfection to simply communicating my message, the words flow more easily and I feel more relaxed and confident.
That's a wonderful mindset to have, Mike. It's about letting go of that inner critic and embracing the joy of learning and experimenting with the language.
And another tip that I found helpful is to focus on chunking.
Chunking. What's that?
Chunking is a technique where you group words together into smaller units rather than saying each word individually. It's like taking small steps instead of giant leaps.
Can you give us an example of how that works in practice?
Sure. Instead of saying, I want to go to the store,
Yeah.
you would chunk the words together and say, I want to go to the store. It
Yeah.
might seem like a small change, but it can make a big difference in the smoothness and fluency of your speech.
That's fascinating. It's like creating a rhythm or a flow in your speech by grouping those words together.
Exactly. And the great thing about chunking is that it happens naturally in spoken English. So by practicing this technique, you're essentially training your brain to speak more like a native speaker.
That's a brilliant tip, Mike. And it reminds us that fluency is not just about knowing a lot of words, it's about knowing how to use those words effectively and naturally in conversation.
Exactly. And chunking is one of those subtle yet powerful techniques that can really elevate your fluency to the next level.
So we've talked about the importance of mindset and techniques, but another crucial aspect of improving your fluency is finding opportunities to practice speaking with others.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, language is all about communication. And the more you practice speaking with real people, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
It appears that finding a language partner or joining a conversation group can provide invaluable opportunities for real-world practice and feedback. It's like having a workout buddy for your English speaking skills.
I love that analogy, a workout buddy for English speaking. Because it's true, having someone to practice with can help you stay motivated, accountable, and on track with your goals.
And there are so many great resources available these days for finding language partners and conversation groups. You can use apps like HelloTalk or Tandem, join online communities like italki or Verbling, or even look for local language exchange meetups in your area.
And the beauty of these online platforms is that you can connect with people from all over the world who share your passion for learning English.
It's a truly global community of language learners supporting and encouraging each other on their fluency journeys.
And speaking of fun and engaging ways to practice your fluency, let's not forget about the power of music.
Music, absolutely. Singing along to your favorite English songs is not only a great way to improve your pronunciation and rhythm, but it's also a lot of fun.
It's like sneaking in a fluency workout without even realizing it. You're absorbing the sounds, the vocabulary, the intonation, all while enjoying the music.
And you can start with slower songs and gradually increase the pace as you get more comfortable.
So you might start with something like Yesterday by the Beatles, and then move on to something more upbeat like Happy by Pharrell Williams.
That's a great suggestion, Mike. And the more you sing along to English songs, the more natural and effortless your speaking will become.
It's like training your inner voice to sing and speak with more confidence and flow.
And speaking of flow, another important concept to keep in mind is the idea of slowing down before you speed up.
That sounds counterintuitive. How does slowing down help you speak faster?
It appears that when you focus on speaking slowly and clearly, you're actually giving your brain more time to process the language and form those neural pathways for fluent speech. It's like laying a strong foundation before you start building the house.
So it's not about rushing through the words, it's about taking your time and building that solid base of pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary.
Exactly. And once you've established that strong foundation, you can gradually increase the speed and still maintain clarity and accuracy.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument again. You start with those slow, deliberate exercises, and then as you get more proficient, you can increase the tempo.
That's a great analogy, Mike, and it reminds us that fluency is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process of learning, practicing, and refining our skills.
And it's a journey that can be incredibly rewarding both personally and professionally. Because as we develop our fluency in English, we open up a world of opportunities for communication, connection, and understanding.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to celebrate those milestones along the way. Acknowledge your progress no matter how small it might seem, and give yourself credit for the effort you're putting in.
Because every step forward is a victory, and it deserves to be recognized and celebrated.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's a whole community of English learners out there who are facing similar challenges and striving for the same goals. So reach out, connect with others, share your experiences, and support each other along the way.
Because language learning is always more fun and effective when we do it together.
Absolutely. And who knows, you might even make some lifelong friends along the way.
So as we wrap up this part of our conversation about speaking English without pausing, I wanted to encourage everyone listening to embrace the journey, to be patient with themselves, and to never stop exploring the wonderful world of English communication.
Because the more you practice, the more you learn, and the more you grow, the closer you'll get to achieving your fluency goals.
And remember, we're here to support you every step of the way. So keep those questions coming, keep practicing, and keep believing in yourself.
We can't wait to see what you accomplish. You know, it's fascinating how we've explored all these techniques that focus on the mental and vocal aspects of speaking fluently. But there's another dimension we haven't touched upon yet, the physical aspect. It appears that our bodies play a crucial role in how we communicate, and sometimes the key to unlocking our fluency lies in harnessing that physical energy.
Oh, I completely agree. I've noticed that when I'm speaking passionately about something, my hands naturally start moving, and it's like they're helping me express my thoughts more vividly. It's almost as if our bodies have their own language that complements our spoken words.
That's a brilliant observation, Mike. It appears that using gestures can actually trigger word retrieval and make speaking feel more natural and spontaneous. It's like our hands are conducting an orchestra of words, guiding them into a harmonious flow.
I love that imagery. It's like our hands are choreographing our speech, adding a visual rhythm that enhances our communication. And it's not just about hand movements, is it? Sometimes even a simple shift in posture or a change in facial expression can make a world of difference in how we convey our message.
Absolutely. It appears that our entire body language contributes to our communication, and when we're aware of those nonverbal cues, we can use them to our advantage to enhance our fluency and expressiveness. It's like we're adding another layer of meaning to our words, making them more impactful and engaging.
It's like we're turning our speech into a performance where every movement, every gesture, every expression contributes to the overall impact. And, speaking of performance, I've noticed that when I'm feeling a bit nervous or hesitant, taking a few deep breaths and consciously relaxing my shoulders and facial muscles can help me feel more grounded and confident.
That's a fantastic tip, Mike. It appears that our physical state can directly influence our mental state, and when we're feeling tense or anxious, it can block our flow of thoughts and words. So taking those moments to center ourselves, to release that physical tension, can create a sense of calm and clarity that allows our words to flow more freely.
It's like we're creating a more receptive space within ourselves for those words to emerge. And I think this ties in beautifully with the concept of mindfulness, which has become increasingly popular in recent years. Being present in the moment, paying attention to our breath, to our body, to our thoughts, can create a sense of inner peace that translates into more confident and fluent communication.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. It appears that mindfulness can be a powerful tool for language learners as it helps us cultivate that sense of self-awareness and non-judgment that allows us to embrace mistakes as learning opportunities and to speak with more authenticity and presence.
It's like we're shifting our focus from the fear of making mistakes to the joy of simply expressing ourselves. And that shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating for our fluency. As we've been exploring all these fantastic techniques and strategies, I've been thinking about the importance of setting goals and creating a roadmap for our fluency journey. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the advice and information out there, but when we have a clear vision of where we want to go and a plan for how to get there, it can make the process feel much more manageable and rewarding.
That's a brilliant point, Mike. It appears that setting daily speaking goals and maintaining a journal of topics to discuss can make a significant difference in our progress. It's like we're creating a personalized fluency training program tailored to our individual needs and aspirations.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It could be something as simple as committing to practicing for 15 minutes each day or choosing a new topic each week to research and talk about. The key is to make it a consistent habit, to integrate those fluency-boosting activities into our daily lives.
And it's important to celebrate those milestones along the way, to acknowledge our progress and appreciate how far we've come. It appears that when we focus on the positive aspects of our journey, it reinforces our motivation and keeps us moving forward with enthusiasm.
It's like we're giving ourselves this little pat on the back that we all need to keep going. And speaking of support, one of the things I found incredibly helpful in my own language learning journey is connecting with other learners and creating a sense of community. It's amazing how much we can learn from each other, how much we can inspire and encourage each other, and how much more fun the journey becomes when we're not traveling alone.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. It appears that having a network of fellow learners can provide invaluable support, motivation, and accountability. It's like we're creating a cheerleading squad for each other, celebrating our victories, and offering encouragement when we face challenges.
And there's so many ways to connect these days, aren't there? We have online forums, language exchange apps, social media groups, even local meetups where we can practice our speaking skills and share our experiences with like-minded people.
Exactly. And those connections can extend beyond language learning, can't they? We can share our cultures, our perspectives, our stories, and create those meaningful bonds that enrich our lives in countless ways.
It's like we're expanding our worldview one conversation at a time.
Mm.
And, as we've been talking about community and connection, it reminds me of the importance of finding ways to make our fluency practice enjoyable. It appears that when we're having fun, we're more likely to stay motivated, aren't we?
Absolutely. It's like we're tapping into that intrinsic motivation that makes learning feel effortless and rewarding. And there's so many creative ways to make fluency practice fun. We
Yeah.
can watch movies, listen to music, play games, even cook together, all while practicing our English speaking skills.
I love those ideas. It's like we're turning our everyday activities into fluency-boosting opportunities. And, speaking of fun and engaging ways to practice, we can't forget about the power of storytelling, can we?
Storytelling. That's a brilliant one, Mike. It appears that storytelling taps into our innate desire to connect with others, to share our experiences, and to create those emotional bonds that make communication so powerful.
Exactly. And when we're telling a story, we're naturally engaging our imaginations, our emotions, and our language skills all at once. It's like we're giving our fluency a full-body workout.
And it doesn't have to be a complicated epic tale, does it? It could be a simple anecdote about our day, a funny memory from childhood, or even a fictional story that we create on the spot.
Absolutely. The key is to find those stories that resonate with us, that spark our enthusiasm, and that we're eager to share with others. And as we've been exploring all these fantastic techniques and strategy, I've been thinking about the importance of embracing our own unique voices and speaking styles. It's easy to get caught up in trying to sound like a native speaker, but the truth is everyone has their own unique rhythm, their own unique cadence, their own unique way of expressing themselves.
That's a beautiful point, Mike. It appears that authenticity is key to effective communication, and when we embrace our own individuality, we bring a special something to the table that no one else can replicate.
It's like we're adding our own personal signature to our speech, making it more memorable and engaging. And, speaking of individuality, one of the things I've learned from interacting with English learners from different cultures is that there's no one right way to speak English.
Yeah.
There's so many different accents, so many different dialects, so many different ways of expressing oneself, and that diversity is what makes the language so rich and vibrant.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. It's like we're weaving a tapestry of voices, each one adding its own unique thread to the overall masterpiece. And, as we've been talking about diversity and individuality, it reminds me of the importance of being respectful and appreciative of the different ways that people communicate.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone is on their own language learning journey and that we can all learn from each other's experiences and perspectives. And, speaking of respect and appreciation, one of the things I found incredibly heartwarming is the willingness of so many native English speakers to support and encourage those who are learning the language. It's like we're creating a global community of language lovers, all united by our passion for communication and connection.
That's a beautiful image, Mike. And it's a reminder that language learning is not just about acquiring skills. It's about building bridges, fostering understanding, and creating a more inclusive and compassionate world.
And I think that's a perfect note to end this part of our conversation on. We've explored so many fantastic techniques and strategies for speaking English without pausing. But ultimately, it's about so much more than just fluency. It's about embracing the journey, celebrating our individuality, connecting with others, and using our voices to create positive change in the world.
Beautifully said, Mike. And we'll be back in part 3 to wrap up our conversation and leave you with some final thoughts and inspirations to continue your fluency journey with confidence and joy.
As we wrap up our exploration of techniques to speak English more fluently, I'm struck by how much we've covered. From the mental aspects of thinking in English to the physicality of gestures and the emotional power of storytelling. It's been quite a journey.
It has indeed, Mike, and I think it's a testament to the multifaceted nature of fluency. It's not just about memorizing grammar rules or expanding your vocabulary. It's about integrating all these different elements into a cohesive and natural way of speaking.
Exactly. And one element that we haven't touched upon yet, but that I think is absolutely crucial, is the role of confidence. It appears that when we believe in ourselves and our ability to communicate effectively, the words flow more easily, and we're less likely to get caught up in those self-defeating pauses and hesitations.
I wholeheartedly agree, Mike. It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Our mindset plays a huge role in our ability to achieve our goals, and that's especially true when it comes to language learning.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we underestimate the power of simply believing in ourselves.
Mm.
We get so caught up in striving for perfection that we forget to celebrate our progress and acknowledge how far we've come.
That's so true, Mike. It's like we're so focused on the destination that we forget to enjoy the journey. And the truth is, even native English speakers make mistakes, stumble over words, and have moments of hesitation. It's part of being human.
Exactly. So it's important to give ourselves permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. Because every time we stumble, we have an opportunity to get back up and try again with a little more knowledge and a little more confidence.
And I think it's also important to remember that fluency is not a fixed state, it's a continuum. It's not about reaching some magical endpoint where we never make mistakes or hesitate. It's about constantly striving to improve and expand our communication skills.
Absolutely. It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You never truly stop learning and growing as a musician. There's always something new to discover, a new technique to master, a new piece to perform.
That's a wonderful analogy, Mike. And it highlights the importance of embracing the process of language learning as a lifelong journey of discovery and growth.
And as we continue on this journey, it's important to surround ourselves with people who support and encourage us, to celebrate our successes, and to help us navigate those inevitable challenges.
Absolutely. It appears that having a strong support system, whether it's a language partner, a tutor, a conversation group, or even just a friend who believes in us, can make a world of difference in our motivation and progress.
And it's not just about receiving support, it's also about giving support to others, to share our knowledge, our experiences, and our encouragement with fellow language learners who might be facing similar challenges.
Because at the end of the day, language learning is not a competition, it's a collaborative effort. We're all in this together, and the more we support each other, the more successful we'll all be.
And that brings me to another point that I think is really important to remember. Language is ultimately about connection. It's about bridging the gaps between people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and different walks of life.
That's beautifully said, Mike. It's not just about speaking words, it's about sharing ideas, emotions, and experiences. It's about building relationships and fostering understanding.
Exactly. And when we approach language learning with that mindset, with a genuine desire to connect with others, the fear of making mistakes melts away, and we're free to express ourselves with authenticity and confidence.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about being perfect, it's about being understood. And the more we practice, the more we connect, the more fluent we'll become.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of English Podcast Flow.
We hope you enjoyed our exploration of techniques to speak English without pausing.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the mental aspects of thinking in English to the physicality of gestures and the emotional power of storytelling.
But the most important takeaway is this: believe in yourself, embrace the journey, and never stop exploring the wonderful world of English communication.
And remember, we're here to support you every step of the way. So keep those questions coming, keep practicing, and keep believing in yourself.
We can't wait to see what you accomplish.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to English Podcast Flow for more episodes on mastering the English language.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Everyone.